Hey guys, tonight we're traveling to Baroque Italy. Not for a war, not for a king, but for a napkin. Yes, a napkin. Not just any napkin though. Tonight you're standing barefoot on the cold marble of a grand dining hall in a 17th century palazzo. The candles are lit, hundreds of them, flickering in tall iron sconces. The table stretches longer than your eyesight, covered with velvet runners, gold-trimmed plates, and a peculiar little linen mountain perched on every dish. The folded napkin. You blink. Is that one shaped like a goose? That one looks like a bishop's mitre. Someone, you realize, has spent hours shaping these napkins into tiny works of absurd, edible adjacent art. You probably won't survive this dinner, not because the food will poison you, but because the etiquette might. There are 12 forks, none identical, and the wrong napkin fold could be read as a political insult. Don't worry though, you're not actually eating. You're just here to fall asleep. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this sleepy little table stretches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the tiled floor of the dining hall, peering at the table in front of you. The guests haven't arrived yet, just rows and rows of place settings, their silver catching the candlelight, their goblets already brimming with diluted wine. But your eyes keep drifting back to the napkins. Each one a miniature sculpture, a frozen swirl of linen, folded with the seriousness of military strategy. Baroque Italy was a place of extremes, excessive music, excessive fashion, and excessive dinner parties. Imagine 60 people attending a feast that lasted 8 hours, featuring roast peacock, candied violets, and a sorbet made from snow carried down from the Alps. But among all the flamboyance, there was one art form so subtle, so easily overlooked, that it whispered its way into the hierarchy of the elite: napkin folding. In fact, in Naples, the folding of napkins was considered so crucial to the performance of hospitality that entire apprenticeships were designed around it. Historians still argue whether these apprentices were true artists or glorified butlers, but no one disputes the care and attention lavished on every fold. It wasn't enough to lay a napkin flat. It had to be something: an animal, a crest, a vegetable, sometimes even a miniature tower echoing the architecture of the host's estate. As you hover near the head of the table, a servant passes by with a massive folded linen centerpiece shaped like an open book. You blink again. Was that always there? Probably. The folds are so delicate, you wouldn't notice unless you were trying not to. The art form, because yes, it was considered an art, was called piegatura, and its masters were not cooks or painters, but people like you. People with too much time, a steady hand, and enough linen to make their mistakes quietly disappear. You reach out and gently touch one of the napkins. It's soft but structured, like very serious origami. The fabric is cool, starched just enough to hold its shape, but not so stiff that it breaks. A common fold of the time was the double hen, a slightly ridiculous concoction of wings, beaks, and ruffles that, with a little imagination, looked like 2 birds nuzzling over a soup bowl. And no, this wasn't just a charming touch. It was a status signal. Hosts competed for the most elaborate folds, each hoping their dinner would be whispered about in folding circles for weeks. Yes, folding circles. That was a thing. Groups of noble servants would meet, often in secret, to swap folding patterns and gossip about which cardinal preferred which design. In Florence, one duke was rumored to have fired an entire staff after they repeated the same fold at 3 dinners in a row. And still no one remembers their names. The irony of the napkin's grandeur is how disposable it always was. After the meal, it went back into a linen chest, if it survived at all. Some were tossed to the dogs. Others were claimed by guests as souvenirs, which was a fancy word for accidental theft. A few ended up stained beyond recognition, their folds forgotten as sauces soaked into their seams. You take another step and feel your feet sink into the hush of velvet carpet. In the distance, the guests are beginning to arrive. Laughter echoes softly, filtered through the cavernous hallways. No one seems to notice the napkins yet, but they will. Someone always does. One woman gasps quietly at the shape of her fold. You can't hear what she says, but you imagine it's something like, "Oh, they remembered I love peacocks." And that, really, is what this was about. Quiet flattery, lavish understatement. A carefully folded nod to someone's taste or mood. Some scholars have traced the earliest formal napkin folds to the 1500s, though it wasn't until the mid-1600s that they became a culinary obsession. One German treatise from 1640, Il Libro del Piegatore, laid out over 200 folding patterns with accompanying diagrams and meditations on linen hygiene. Historians still debate whether these books were ever used or just ornamental, sort of like having a cookbook you never cook from, just display in your kitchen to feel important. As the dining room fills, you remain standing, invisible in your modernity. Someone walks right through you. But you're not here to dine. You're here to drift. Through time, through linen, through candlelight. You lean back against a marble column, arms folded, and look down the table again. 28 seats, each with its own strange creature perched atop a charger plate. Swans, pyramids, hens, maybe even a lobster if you squint. They won't survive the meal, of course. Someone will spill wine, or sauce, or gesture wildly during a story about goat farming, and the folds will collapse. But for now, they sit in perfect, silent form. And so do you. The room warms with the hush of conversation. But you remain still, eyes tracing the folds. You start to notice something strange. Not the shapes themselves, but the way they seem to hold tension. Each crease contains intent, a subtle emphasis placed by fingers trained through repetition and ritual. Napkins, here, aren't just folded, they're constructed. And nowhere is this clearer than in the folds designed to resemble sculptures. You drift closer to a centerpiece napkin shaped into a rearing horse, its neck arched just enough to cast a soft shadow over a silver spoon. There's something slightly absurd about it. A linen steed guarding a fork. But in Baroque Italy, it would have been interpreted not as absurdity, but as elegance. Napkin folding in the 17th century wasn't merely decoration. It was performance. Hosts didn't just prepare food, they staged entire tableaus. Picture a Venetian banquet where every napkin on the table was folded into a scene from mythology. One guest might receive Perseus holding Medusa's head. Another might get a Zeus with lightning bolts made from delicately rolled strips of lace. The folds were not always literal, sometimes they merely suggested, like a napkin shaped vaguely like Mount Etna for a Sicilian guest. And if the folds confused people, even better. The Baroque mind adored theatrical ambiguity. Was that a goose or a bishop's hat? Yes, of course these miniature cloth sculptures couldn't have been created by just anyone. They required practice, planning, and, oddly, blueprints. The more complex folds came from hand-drawn diagrams passed around kitchens like secrets. Servants, especially those at the higher end of domestic hierarchies, memorized specific folds the way musicians memorize scales. Some had personal notebooks filled with miniature sketches, swatches pinned beside the margins to test fabric behavior. Historians still argue whether these diagrams were copied from printed manuals or invented in-house, but the results speak for themselves. napkins that stood tall and proud without a single stitch or pin. You imagine a servant bent over a long wooden table, testing folds by candlelight. His hands move rhythmically, half, quarter, diagonal, twist, tuck. One wrong crease and the whole goose flattens like a tragic pancake. But when it works, when the fold locks just right, the linen stands. And for a fleeting moment, he feels something akin to pride. There's a story that floats through the archives, probably embellished but charming nonetheless, about a folder in the papal kitchens who once sculpted the entire nativity from napkins. Baby Jesus, the manger, the ox and the donkey, each carefully positioned with folds and pleats. According to the tale, a cardinal knocked over a pitcher of wine and ruined it before dessert. The folder was said to have sighed once, deeply, then asked if anyone had a spare tablecloth. You run your fingers along the edge of the closest fold. It's shaped like a blooming artichoke. And in this moment you realize just how Baroque this all is. Delicate excess, precise flamboyance. These weren't napkins designed to dab your mouth. They were created to whisper, "Look how much time I have." Interestingly, not everyone loved the trend. In Rome, some clergy railed against the vanity of the fold. One Jesuit even wrote a scathing little pamphlet titled, "God is not impressed by your napkin swans." It didn't sell well. The elite, after all, rarely changed their dining habits based on religious guilt, especially when folds were involved. It's not entirely clear where these sculptural folds originated. Some scholars credit the German-speaking regions of northern Italy, where court culture was obsessed with pageantry. Others point to Florence, with its legacy of textile innovation and visual drama. Either way, by the 1660s the trend had taken hold, and every noble household with a reputation to protect had a folding servant, or two. Imagine a formal dinner at the Medici court. The table is already groaning under the weight of pewter platters, but the eye goes straight to the napkins. One set is arranged to resemble garden hedges. Another mimics the Medici crest in looping pleats. Guests murmur appreciatively, even if they have no idea what they're looking at. And that's part of the fun. These folds aren't meant to be understood, only admired. The linen used had to be precise, too stiff, and the folds cracked, too soft, and everything slumped like a defeated souffle. High-quality Italian linen, known as fiandra, was the gold standard, soft, strong, and finely woven. It came in massive bolts, often bleached in the sun for days until it gleamed like alabaster. Servants took great care in washing, drying, and starching these napkins, and then even more care in ironing them without scorching the fabric. You spot a folded fish near the end of the table, its tail artfully twisted to mimic motion. Across from it, a slightly flattened dragon has lost one wing to gravity. You smile a little. Even in a perfectly set table, time has its way. Not every host had access to expert folders. That didn't stop them from trying. In lesser homes, folds often drooped or listed to one side, especially if someone tried to copy a design from a book without knowing how to anchor it. This led to some deliciously petty gossip. In a letter from 1681, a Neapolitan noblewoman describes a rival's table as a sagging zoo of cloth beasts suffering from neglect. Even so, the effort mattered. A well-folded napkin meant you cared about your guests, or at least about your image. It suggested that your household was in order, your linen closet was deep, and your servants could follow instructions. And let's be honest, who wouldn't want a tiny linen giraffe waiting for them at dinner? As the hall settles into murmured conversation, and the first course approaches, something buttery, steaming, slightly intimidating, you fade a little farther back into the marble shadows. The folds remain front and center, silent, composed, and strangely powerful. Each one is a performance paused, waiting for a hand to lift it and begin the unmaking. You linger near the servant's entrance, drawn not to the guests now sipping on wine and comparing feathered sleeves, but to the quiet, brisk movements of those behind the performance. The folds, perfect as they appear on the table, didn't get there by accident. They were the final act in a day-long ballet that began in the kitchens, yes, but also, crucially, in the linen room. Here, among rows of neatly stacked cloth and long pine drying racks, servants spoke in a language of folds. Not the visible language of napkin sculpture, that was for the guests, but a quieter, coded system used to signal everything from menu changes to political gossip. One slightly bent corner? The wine stewards on thin ice, a twist on the left instead of the right? The bishop will be seated next to his enemy. Again. Folding was communication, not just decoration. And you, trailing the movement of one particularly fastidious linen maid, begin to notice how deliberate her hands are. She's not simply folding, she's marking. A single crease down the center might tell the kitchen that fish has replaced veal. 3 tucks along the base? Expect someone to announce an engagement mid-dessert. Historians still argue whether these napkin codes were officially sanctioned or invented on the fly by clever domestic staff. Some say it was purely practical, a way to keep massive dinners from spiraling into chaos. Others insist there was a deeper game being played, one where a well-placed fold could subtly ruin a rival's evening. You lean toward the latter. It just seems too deliciously sly to dismiss. There's one case, recorded in a collection of Florentine domestic accounts, where a folded fan, left intentionally askew at a noblewoman's place, sparked rumors of infidelity. A scandal followed, of course. The servant responsible vanished shortly after. Fired? Disgraced? Or promoted to a more discreet household? No one knows. But it's a reminder. In Baroque Italy, even napkins had consequences. In households with dozens of servants, napkin folding became part of a quiet hierarchy. The best folders weren't necessarily the highest ranked, but they were trusted with secrets. They overheard things, saw seating charts before anyone else, and knew when a dinner was going to be tense, before the guests even arrived. You imagine a young folder, probably 16, stationed at the long wooden table in the servants' quarters. He's been trained in the basics, swans, fans, bishop hats. But tonight he's been asked for a custom piece, a napkin folded to resemble a phoenix. The symbolism is not lost on him. Someone powerful is trying to rise again. Maybe it's a guest who's just returned from exile, or a duchess rebuilding her social standing after a particularly juicy public mistake. He works silently, folding and unfolding until the phoenix stands upright, wings suggested in 3 sharp creases, beak formed from a careful roll at the center. He finishes it, hesitates, then adds a tiny, rebellious flourish, a zigzag along the tail, unofficial and unasked for. A signature, a wink. You watch him set it gently into a shallow copper tray and walk it to the dining room, where it's placed carefully on a silver charger. The tray is whisked away, but the phoenix remains. Proud. Subtle. Watching. These folds didn't just communicate. They remembered. Like the one known as La Piaga, or the wound, used at somber dinners to mark mourning. It wasn't shaped like an injury, thank goodness. It looked more like a narrow spiral. But its appearance told servants and guests alike. Speak softly. Tonight, grief sits at the table, too. There were lighter folds, of course. The butterfly, used for spring banquets. The trumpet, popular with musicians and military men. And the artichoke, which carried a double meaning, a culinary nod, and a symbol of hidden hearts, useful at dinners where matchmaking was quietly underway. And then, there were the joke folds. Yes, joke folds. Baroque Italians had a sense of humor, even in their linens. One popular example was the bearded monk, a squat, folded figure with a little twist of cloth suggesting facial hair. It was used sparingly, usually for visiting clerics with a taste for wine or rumors of womanizing. Another was the snail, often placed at a guest's seat if they'd arrived late to a previous dinner. A gentle ribbing in cloth. Of course, not all folds were so light-hearted. Some carried real weight. The cage, a rare and difficult shape, was only used in courts where politics ran dangerously hot. Made of interlocking loops, it looked beautiful, but the symbolism was clear. Someone here is trapped. Someone here is being watched. You float now near the high table, where the host has just arrived. He doesn't glance at the napkins, of course. That would be beneath him. But he notices. Everyone notices. A slight nod to a folded crown-shaped napkin near the guest of honor confirms it. Tonight's event is more than just dinner. It's theater. The guests begin to lift their napkins. Some unfold them slowly, reverently, afraid to destroy the artistry. Others, less sentimental, unravel the folds in a single motion, like peeling an orange. The folds are vanishing now, one by one, absorbed into laps and lapses in conversation. But you still see them, echoes of intent in every crease, messages tucked inside linen. A servant glances your way, not at you exactly, but through you, and smiles faintly. She knows. The folds are gone, but the stories remain. The feast is underway now. Forks clink against porcelain, wine murmurs in glasses, and the folds, once proud, perched and symbolic, lie flattened like trampled petals. But you know better. You know what it took to bring them here, what rituals had to unfold, quite literally, before the folding even began. You step away from the din of the banquet hall and wander down a corridor lined with tapestries, following the scent of lavender and wood smoke. Soon you reach a lower chamber, humid and humming. This is the garderoba, the linen room, and it smells of clean fabric, warm starch, and centuries of quiet labor. Here, nestled within heavy wooden wardrobes, lie bolts of linen as far as the eye can see, stacked in perfect order, embroidered edges aligned like soldiers in formation. This is where the life of a napkin begins. Not on the table, not even on the folding bench. But here, in the hidden sanctum of cloth and steam, Baroque Italy prized its linens. The best came from Flanders, but the local weavers of Lucca, Venice, and Milan were no slouches either. Long staple flax, spun into thread so fine it could pass through a wedding ring, was the standard. These napkins were thick yet soft, dense enough to absorb oil, but sheer enough to glow in candlelight. You reach out and brush one, cool and crisp, like touching the edge of a cloud that's been ironed within an inch of its life. And ironed they were. You pass a long table where a servant is working steadily, arms dusted in chalk, gliding a heavy iron across a steaming swatch. The iron's base is smooth brass, heated by coals tucked into a brazier below. No thermostats, no warning lights, just instinct, and the subtle sizzle of linen sighing beneath heat. The process takes hours. Each napkin must be washed, first in lye soap, then rinsed in lime water, and finally bleached in the sun until it's bright enough to read poetry off of. Then it's starched, not with your average modern spray, but with a cooked blend of flour and water, boiled to just the right consistency so that the folds will hold, but the fabric won't crack. A badly mixed starch could ruin dozens of napkins, so each batch is tested on scraps before the real cloths are ever touched. There's a fringe theory, mostly circulated by textile historians with a flair for the dramatic, that some elite households added ground egg whites or even powdered pearl to their starch for extra sheen. No one agrees, but the idea of breakfast and jewelry meeting in a napkin is very on brand for the Baroque. Once starched and pressed, the napkins are rolled into soft cylinders and stored in lavender-lined drawers. Not for scent, though that's a bonus, but to repel moths, the eternal enemy of well-folded things. Some noble families had entire inventories of napkins catalogued like silverware. 12 fans, 6 double rosettes, 2 phoenixes, 1 chicken disaster. Do not reuse. Folding didn't happen in a rush. No one was dashing off a goose 20 minutes before the guests arrived. Folding was a ceremony, a calm, measured act conducted in the mid-afternoon, long before the scent of roasted meat began to drift through the halls. Some households had a piegatore, a designated folder, whose job it was to interpret the mood of the meal and select folds accordingly. Feeling whimsical? Swans. Celebrating a military victory? The trumpet fold, naturally. Mourning a distant cousin with a tragic mustache? The single twist, humble but elegant. Each choice mattered. There's a servant here now, perched at a wide table beneath a high-arched window. She hums as she works, folding with the absent grace of someone who's done this hundreds, no, thousands of times. Her hands barely pause. A triangle, a fan, a careful tuck beneath a hidden flap. She pauses only once to adjust the stiffness of a corner. It's too loose. She sighs and starts over. In another house, this might be dismissed as fussy, but not here. Here, folding is part of the performance. One nobleman is said to have dismissed his entire household staff because their napkins drooped by the time the cheese course arrived. Extreme? Yes. But so was this era. It's said that some families treated their folded napkins as a kind of domestic prophecy. If a fold fell apart mid-meal, it was considered an omen, good or bad depending on the shape. A collapsed bishop's hat meant religious squabbling in the week to come. A melting goose? Travel delays. A dragon slumped on its side? Someone was going to be publicly embarrassed before the end of dessert. Superstition or not, you can see how one might look for signs in the folds when politics were tense and dinner conversations sharper than the steak knives. You float farther into the linen room and spot something curious. A small hand-sewn cloth book. Its pages are made entirely of fabric, and upon each one, a sample fold is stitched. This was likely a servant's personal portfolio. Think of it as an ancient LinkedIn for napkin artists. A discreet way to showcase your work to visiting stewards in hopes of being poached by a wealthier household. On one page, a clumsy early swan. On the next, a remarkably detailed crown with tiny linen pearls arranged along the edge. And at the very back, a pattern you haven't seen before. A rose bloom with the word nonna stitched beneath. A tribute, maybe, to a grandmother who taught the folder her first spiral. The work is intimate, imperfect, and completely beautiful. You close the book gently, then drift back toward the doorway. Beyond it, the dining room glows with candlelight. The folds have all been undone, their meaning spent. But down here, in the quiet heart of the house, napkins are still being born. Creased, coaxed, composed. One final thing catches your eye. A scrap of paper tacked to the wall near the folding table. It's yellowed and curling, but legible. 3 lines written in delicate, slanted script. Every fold is a gesture, every crease, a thought, every napkin, a whisper. You exhale slowly, and the linen rustles ever so slightly, as if agreeing. Back upstairs, the meal continues, but you've now seen too much to look at the table the same way. You know the folds didn't appear by magic. They were earned. And behind every perfectly placed artichoke or fluted fan, there was someone who trained for years, often in obscurity, for the right to place that linen sculpture before a duke. And training, it turns out, was no casual affair. You find yourself now in a different part of the palazzo, a narrow courtyard just behind the servants' wing. A long wooden bench runs along one side, sun-warmed and marked by centuries of use. This is where apprentices once gathered to learn the fold. Not just a fold. The fold. The one their master believed encapsulated elegance, balance, discipline. Usually it was something unnecessarily complex, like a twin-bird display with flared wings and a hidden pouch for sweetmeats. Here, young servants were drilled daily. Fold, unfold, fold again. The master would hover behind them, hands clasped, brow permanently furrowed. Any hint of asymmetry, and the linen was yanked from their fingers with a sigh of existential disappointment. "Your peacock looks like it's been through something," he'd mutter. There were rules. So many rules. Folds must be mirrored precisely. No visible creases unless called for. Napkins must align with the plate's diameter, not hang awkwardly off the side. You think your high school geometry teacher was intense? Try pleasing a Tuscan folder with a crooked goose wing. There were legends of apprentices folding with gloves on, blindfolded, even upside down, all to ensure muscle memory. And no, these weren't just urban legends whispered in linen closets. Letters from the time detail folding schools, Scuola del Piegatore, often attached to large households or guild halls. One noble family in Milan was said to sponsor annual folding competitions, complete with judges, prizes, and at least one argument that ended in someone throwing a folded hedgehog into the Arno. The best students earned positions in prestigious homes. Their names rarely appeared in official ledgers, but everyone in the domestic sphere knew them. That's the girl who folded the phoenix for the Duke of Urbino. He's the one who fixed the bishop's hat in under a minute after it fell apart mid-toast. Quiet fame, passed from laundry room to banquet hall. You now watch a memory replay itself. A boy, maybe 12, attempting the double tulip fold under the watchful eye of a folder who could probably crease a basilisk from linen with his eyes closed. The boy's fingers tremble slightly as he tries the final tuck. He fails. The fold flattens. The folder doesn't shout. Instead, he takes the boy's hands, adjusts the angle gently, and says, "Again. But this time, fold like you mean it." That was the key, wasn't it? Napkin folding wasn't about precision alone. It was about intention. Every fold carried energy. Quiet, invisible, but there. You had to fold with feeling. With restraint, sure, but also with pride. You weren't just making a shape, you were making a moment. You wander now into what might have once been a small classroom. On the wall hangs a tattered sheet with drawn instructions. Faint ink lines show the steps to create the Florentine crown, a particularly fussy fold involving at least 12 sequential moves and a light press from the wrist to form the center peak. At the bottom, in scrawled Latin, Pulchritudo nascitur in silentio. Beauty is born in silence. There were exams, too. Not written, but demonstrated. Masters would hand apprentices a blank square of linen and time them. The result had to stand upright. It had to match the example. Most importantly, it had to feel intentional. Anything less, and you were back to polishing brass candlesticks for a week. Some noble households kept folding logs, records of designs used at each banquet, not out of sentiment, but to avoid repetition. Heaven forbid the same guest receive the same goose twice. That kind of oversight could trigger polite scandal. And then there were the house styles. Like modern brands with signature fonts, elite homes often developed their own folding motifs. The House of Farnese favored folds that emphasized vertical height. Obelisks, spires, fans. The Gonzagas liked flatter, spread-out designs, sunbursts and flower beds. Folding students had to memorize not just the patterns, but the philosophy behind them. The Medici fold upward, one master reportedly said, because they always want to be seen. Historians still argue whether any of this instruction qualified as true art. Some claim folding was more craft than creativity. Others point to the detail, symbolism, and personal flourishes embedded in each napkin sculpture. You side with the folders, naturally. If cake decorating gets to be art, so does a swan made out of starch-stiffened linen. One odd tidbit survives from a minor Venetian palace, an instruction manual titled Manuale per il piegatore novizio, or Manual for the Novice Folder. Among its rules, do not fold while angry. If you bleed on the linen, discard it. The fold must stand without breath but yield under fingertips. Never fold with dirty hands, or you will shame your house. Worm. If you fold while the church bells ring, pause and give thanks. You smile. Even if half of that was metaphor, it tells you something. This wasn't just cloth manipulation. It was devotion. A soft discipline, learned in shadows, remembered through muscle. As you exit the courtyard, the sun dips low, casting long golden fingers across the walls. Somewhere, a bell rings. Not for prayer, probably just dinner prep. But you pause anyway. A gentle nod to the folders. And maybe a silent thank you. The path leads back toward the banquet hall. And though the folds are all undone, you now understand the journey they've taken. The hours of practice, the silent guidance, the pride stitched invisibly into each crease. Every fold was someone's masterpiece, someone's test, someone's tiny triumph. And now they lie in laps, soft and forgotten. But not by you. The banquet is well underway, but your attention isn't on the roast boar or the endless toasts. It's on the folds. Well, what's left of them. Many lie in guests' laps, flattened and crumpled, their sculptural glory surrendered to soup and wine. But a few remain untouched, preserved like little monuments to etiquette and elbow room. You circle the table, drawn to one that still holds its shape, a pyramid, narrow at the base, rising with elegant angles into a crisp, symmetrical peak. This was one of the most popular folds of the Baroque era, the Triangolo Classico. Beloved for its simplicity and symbolism, it was often the first design taught to apprentices, and the last one mastered before they were allowed to move on to more flamboyant shapes. The pyramid was safe, sturdy, uncontroversial. It said, "This dinner will be well-mannered and probably boring, but tonight's table is a gallery. Here's a goose, delicate beak tilted toward a wine goblet. There's a bishop's mitre, intricate and slightly smug. A crown, a double fan, and, impressively, a spiral rose that seems to defy the laws of starch." You try folding one yourself, in your mind at least. Start with a perfect square. Fold it in half, diagonally. Again, tuck the corners inward, press the center. Adjust for symmetry. It sounds simple, but one twitch of the wrist and the whole structure wilts. Folds were less about strength and more about balance, like a house of cards made from the world's fanciest dish towel. You linger near the artichoke again, probably the carciofo a tre punte, a particularly Baroque interpretation that combined culinary homage with geometric bravado. This fold was considered the high watermark of napkin design for a brief but glorious period in the mid-1600s. It required an almost sculptural sensibility, demanding precise layering of pleats and a central twist that could only be achieved using a fingertip and exactly the right humidity. Too dry, and it cracked. Too moist, and the whole thing flopped like a sad salad. There's a myth, still passed around among linen historians, that one Florentine folder could make this particular design blindfolded, using only one hand, while reciting a Petrarchan sonnet. His name, conveniently, has been lost to time. But his legend? Unfolding eternally. Other popular folds included the Cigno di Mezzanotte, used for late banquets and moonlit toasts, the Vortice del Mare, an elaborate spiral resembling a snail shell, and the ever-dramatic il fuoco, a flame-shaped fold meant to evoke passion, drama, and possibly indigestion. Not all folds were beautiful. Some were absurd. There's the infamous cavolfiore, or cauliflower, an ambitious attempt at representing the vegetable that almost always ended up looking like a wrinkled sock. Then there's the uovo rotto, or broken egg, a deliberately collapsed design meant to convey whimsy, but mostly just looked broken. It was popular at second weddings and quiet dinners among frenemies. And while these folds appeared effortless on the table, they rarely were. In fact, many required tools. Small wooden rods, starched shaping cones, and even tiny silver clips were sometimes employed to stabilize the more complex creations. But no one was supposed to know that. A true folder removed all props before the napkin reached the table, leaving behind only the illusion of miraculous geometry. Historians still argue whether the use of props should be considered cheating. Some purists claim the best folds must stand entirely on their own. Others point out that if you're feeding 40 people with 12 courses, a little wire here or there isn't the real crime. The folds weren't just practical or pretty. They were seasonal. In spring, you might see flower folds, tulips, daisies, or even a sprig of embroidered lavender peeking from a folded cone. Summer called for fans and fish. Autumn brought darker linens and shapes evoking wheat, horns of plenty, or, if the host was feeling theatrical, a folded mushroom symbolizing death, rebirth, and questionable foraging choices. Winter, though, was the most dramatic. Folds got taller, more angular. Swans became geese. Pyramids gained extra tiers. One northern Italian house even employed a team of folders who crafted entire napkin nativity scenes for Christmas Eve, complete with a baby Jesus wrapped in a miniature linen swaddle. Was it over the top? Absolutely. But so was the rest of the meal, which reportedly included gold-dusted figs and a marzipan cathedral. You pause by the high table, where one napkin still sits untouched. A swan, perfectly balanced, its wings flared just so. It hasn't sagged, hasn't slumped, and it seems to regard you with quiet pride. This is the Cigno Reale, the royal swan. A fold reserved for honored guests and heads of household. The design is deceptively simple, but the neck, arched just so, requires the exact pinch of thumb and forefinger. Too tight, and the head droops. Too loose, and the neck refuses to rise. It's said that one Medici banquet was delayed 20 minutes because the host's personal folder couldn't get the swan necks to match. Guests waited patiently, sipping watered wine and speculating on neck angles. When the swans finally arrived, perfectly matched, everyone applauded, including the geese, probably. Even the guests had opinions. Some were fold collectors. Yes, really. Guests would take their napkins home, carefully unfolded and flattened, then stored in books like pressed flowers. A few households had scrapbooks of folds they'd received at various palaces, annotated with ink notes like Naples, 1673, good folds, poor wine, or Florence, 1681, lovely trumpet, bland pheasant. You wonder what happened to those books. Lost in attics, shredded by time, mistaken for ordinary cloth samples and thrown away. But maybe one or two still survive, nestled in drawers, quietly remembering dinners long forgotten. The folds, for all their intricacy, were never meant to last. That was part of the charm. They were fleeting masterpieces, created with care, admired for a few moments, then destroyed by gravy and elbows. There's something oddly comforting about that. You glance down at the pyramid again, still holding, still elegant, still whispering something if only you could listen closely enough. You slip away from the clatter of cutlery and drift down a side passage, this time into a quieter room, smaller, lined with cabinets and smelling faintly of cloves and pressed violets. This, you quickly realize, is the storage room for specialty linens. It's hushed here, like a chapel, with heavy curtains drawn against the moonlight, and every surface speaks of care and intention. A set of drawers labeled with names. Trianguli, Pium, Ventagli, catches your eye. Triangles, feathers, fans. These aren't just napkin folds, they're categories. You open one drawer, carefully. Inside, perfectly folded linens, each sitting in its own little compartment, gently padded with rose petals and cedar shavings. Not in display, no. These are test folds, samples. Imagine that. Practice napkins, archived like prized manuscripts. There's something absurdly beautiful about it, like cataloging clouds or bottling laughter. But here in Baroque Italy, the fold was serious business. And as you flip through one shelf after another, a pattern begins to emerge. Some folds belonged to families. Yes, like a coat of arms, only made of linen. Some noble houses developed and jealously guarded their own signature folds. The House of Este, for example, was known for the ali del falco, falcon's wings, a sprawling fan-like fold with a split tail. You'd know it the moment you saw it, and so would your enemies. It said, "We are sharp, we are swift, we arrive first." Elsewhere, the Savoy family favored the croce piegata, or folded cross, a stark, symmetrical design popular for state dinners and overly solemn breakfasts. The Medici, unsurprisingly, loved the opulent folds, the giglio fiorentino, which echoed the shape of their symbolic lily. And there were more obscure houses with stranger folds, a family in Parma that specialized in folding their napkins into goat horns. Don't ask. Historians still debate whether these family folds were registered or simply understood by the social elite. There's no surviving list, of course. That would have made it all too easy. But you could spot them if you knew where to look. A little twist here, a shadowed pleat there. Style, it seems, leaves fingerprints. Sometimes these housefolds weren't just identity. They were diplomacy. You imagine a moment. A visiting envoy arrives from Genoa, nervous about seating, status, and soup temperature. He's led to his place at the table and pauses. There, on his charger, is a fold shaped like an open shell, la conciglia aperta, a rare design, one that only appears when a host is willing to set aside pride and extend a true welcome. The envoy relaxes. The dinner proceeds. War is, temporarily, averted. And when folds went wrong, oh, the drama. A misplaced fold could trigger everything from icy silence to outright scandal. There's a recorded instance, somewhere in the letters of a fussy court secretary, of a dinner hosted by a Sicilian nobleman, where a guest of honor was given a ramo caduto, or fallen branch. Traditionally, a fold reserved for mourning. The guest, still very much alive and rather proud of it, left in a huff. No one knows if it was sabotage or simple misunderstanding, but the folding servant was replaced by mourning. You smile, not out of malice, but because it's all so gloriously human. Napkins, those humble squares of cloth, had the power to alter politics, affect reputations, even kindle romance. In an age of gilded pomp and choreographed grace, a small mistake in linen could be as loud as a trumpet blast. There's a softer side to all of this, too. Some folds weren't about performance, or politics, or house pride. They were private, intimate, hidden meanings known only to a few. A fold shaped like a heart, but disguised as a leaf. A pair of swans pressed together just slightly too close. A loop that could conceal a note, written in lemon juice, perhaps, revealed only when held near a candle's flame. Yes, it happened. Folding, for some, became a secret code. When letters were too risky or eyes too watchful, the fold spoke. Historians still argue whether any full system of linen-based communication ever existed, or if these were just one-off acts of cleverness. But it's tempting to imagine lovers exchanging messages under the pretense of table service. A folded flower with one petal curled inward, meaning, "I forgive you." A spiral turned right, meaning, "Not tonight." And to the left, "Meet me after dessert." You find, tucked in one drawer, a linen shaped like a pouch, la tasca, with a tiny slip of parchment still folded inside. Faded with time, it reads only, "Non guardare così vicino. Non sei pronto. Don't look so closely. You're not ready." You lean back, slowly, a joke, a warning, a flirtation. No one will ever know. And yet somehow you do. You leave the drawer open, respectfully, and move back toward the table. The folds have all been used now, some crumpled beyond recognition, a few gently refolded by polite guests, a kind of tribute to the effort they represent. But the meaning, the memory, still lingers. Each fold is a sentence, each table a paragraph, and together they compose a novel no one can read the same way twice. You look again at the nobleman at the head of the table. His napkin lies untouched on his plate. La piramide spezzata, the broken pyramid. A rare fold, used only when something is ending. A journey, a season, a long-held tradition. He picks it up slowly, with the weariness of someone who's seen too many endings, and unfolds it with care. You realize the dinner isn't just a meal, it's a farewell. To whom or what, you don't yet know. But the fold says enough. The nobleman's pyramid has vanished now, absorbed into his lap like all the others. But the message lingers in the air, subtle yet undeniable. You drift back from the high table and into the quieter corners of the hall, where the candles flicker low and the air smells of cinnamon and old wood. It's here, in the shadows, that the most peculiar chapter of napkin history unfolds. The era of theatrical folding. Yes, theatrical. Because, as if folding a goose or phoenix weren't dramatic enough, some Baroque hosts took things even further. In their quest for novelty, spectacle, and one-upmanship, they turned napkin folding into full-blown dinner table performances. It starts with the reveal. At many dinners, napkins were simply waiting on the plate. But at certain elite tables, particularly in Rome and Naples, they were unveiled with flair. Servants would glide in with silver trays, each napkin hidden beneath a small velvet dome. The domes were lifted in unison, and there, beneath them, a folded dragon, an architectural folly, a scallop shell cradling sugared almonds. Gasp, applause, at least one guest pretending not to be jealous. Then came the movable folds. Yes, some folds were made to animate. The fiore rotante, or spinning flower, was one such marvel. When gently pulled at its center, it unfurled in spirals, releasing a puff of scented powder hidden within the creases. Another favorite was the cigno vivente, the living swan. Not actually alive, but rigged with tiny springy folds that allowed the wings to flap ever so slightly when nudged by a breeze, or the carefully timed wave of a fan. And then, the centerpiece folds. These weren't individual napkins, but massive sculptural arrangements, often created from dozens of linens stitched together. Picture a Baroque nativity scene, but instead of wood or porcelain, it's all done in starched damask. A tower of swans, a Roman temple with fluted columns. One enterprising Venetian count commissioned an entire miniature hunting scene, riders, hounds, and stags, all folded from cloth. The guests clapped, of course. The folder fainted. Historians still argue whether these centerpieces should be counted as napkin folds or table art. Some claim they break the sacred rule of utility, that a napkin must be usable. Others argue that if you could, technically, unfold it and dab your mouth with part of it, it still counts. A gray area, like calling a swan a towel, even the materials became more dramatic. Traditional linen gave way to damask blends, raw silk overlays, and, occasionally, metal threaded weaves that shimmered in candlelight. Folded just right, they caught the eye and held it like jewelry. You float now into a side room, where one of these folding artists once worked. A long wooden bench dominates the space, worn smooth at the edges, and there's a small, soot-darkened hearth for heating starch and irons. The air is dense with memory. There's a design board propped against one wall, with faded sketches pinned in place. One shows a swan, not unlike the one you saw earlier, but with annotations. Arrows, notes on angle and tension, a scribbled "too droopy, try drier linen." Next to it, a drawing of something stranger. A coiled spiral with nested points, labeled La Spirale d'autunno. The autumn spiral. You remember reading about this one. The fold was designed to slowly unwind throughout the meal. Each course, another layer loosened by movement, breath, or heat. By dessert, the fold would have collapsed into a flat circle, symbolizing closure. Some guests never noticed. Others called it art. One reviewer at the time called it emotionally excessive napkinry. Not everyone approved of theatrical folds. Some critics, usually older nobles with too much gout and too little whimsy, called them vulgar distractions. "Let the food be the drama," one wrote. "I do not need my napkin to perform." He probably also hated parades and birthday hats, but for a moment in time, these flourishes ruled the table. And behind every dramatic fold, there was a piegatore teatrale, a theatrical folder, trained not just in technique, but in timing. They had to know when to fold, how long a scent would linger, how much tension a wing could bear before it sagged. It was engineering, choreography, and poetry stitched into fabric. There's a wonderful oddity you recall from a banquet in Modena, 1675. The guests arrived to find no napkins at their plates. Confused but too polite to speak up, they sat. The first course arrived, still no napkins. Only when the soup was cleared did the folding troupe emerge, dressed in matching liveries, and deliver each guest a freshly folded napkin shaped like a clenched fist. It was called La Mano Silenciosa, the silent hand. A joke about patience? A commentary on control? No one knows, but the guests remembered it for years. And yes, there were troupes. Some theatrical folders became so well known that they formed small companies, hired out by noble families for special occasions. Like florists or firework masters, they'd arrive a day early, set up shop in a side room, and conjure up napkin magic by sunset. A good troupe was worth its weight in truffles. A bad one? Well, let's just say there were consequences. Not fatal ones, just career-ending. Which, in Baroque Italy, was practically the same thing. You turn now toward a small chest tucked behind a faded screen. Inside, folded parchment instructions, aging, brittle, and beautifully detailed. One, illustrated in delicate ink, shows step-by-step instructions for La farfalla in volo, the flying butterfly. Arched wings, curved antennae, and a hidden base so it tilted forward, as if taking off. At the bottom, a note. Best presented with lemon sorbet. Requires open windows. Of course it did. You close the chest slowly and smile. Theatrical folding may have faded with time, replaced by lace overlays and florid menus, but the memory remains, folded gently into the corners of history. It wasn't just about impressing guests. It was about delight, surprise. That little gasp when cloth became creature, when linen moved like poetry, when a napkin made someone feel something, if only for a breath. And that's worth folding for. The theatrics fade behind you now. like the last shimmer of a stage curtain falling. You drift onward, deeper into the palazzo, where the mood shifts again, away from the grand and the showy, toward something softer, something more personal. Welcome to the world of everyday folds. Not every dinner in Baroque Italy was a banquet. Not every guest was a duke. In quieter moments, those long afternoons when the chandeliers stayed unlit and the only music came from the kitchen, it was the simple folds that held court. You're in a modest dining room now, perhaps in a merchant's home. The walls are lined with bookshelves, and the hearth is barely smoking. There are 3 places set at the table: mother, father, child. The napkins here are plainer, still starched, yes, still lovingly creased, but without flair. A half triangle, a small envelope, the kind of fold that says, "Let's eat and not argue about Venetian tariffs." You might think these folds were an afterthought. But oh no, even the humblest linen square had its place in the silent ballet of household rituals. The merchant's wife, perhaps trained in a noble house during her youth, folds each napkin before the meal. Not for show, but out of habit. A kind of domestic grace. The child at the table learns these folds the way one learns prayers or lullabies, by watching, mimicking, failing, trying again. Corner to corner, the mother says softly. Now tuck the edge, gently. It's not a battle. A crooked triangle appears, proud and slightly damp with concentration. It's placed beside a bowl of chickpea soup like a masterpiece. In homes like these, folds served not only to impress, but to teach. Patience, pride, and the fine art of quiet details. Somewhere in Genoa, a housemaid starts her day with 10 basic folds. Not for a noble dinner, but for daily meals. Monday, triangles. Tuesday, fans. Wednesday, folded pockets to hold a fig or a piece of hard cheese. Her mistress insists on the habit. "It keeps the rhythm of the house," she says, pouring watered wine. And she's right. In a world of unpredictable crops, court politics, and occasional duels over sheep grazing rights, a perfectly folded napkin was a small pocket of order. You pass into a laundry courtyard now, where lines of linen sway in the breeze like sleepy ghosts. A woman stands beside a wooden bench, folding as she hums. Her folds aren't fancy, but they're consistent. A 3-part fan. A gentle twist. She works quickly, her hands remembering what her mind needn't. In her apron is a sprig of rosemary, not for seasoning, but for scent. She presses a bit into the corner of each napkin as she folds it. Later, when her family sits to eat, the scent will lift subtly in the warmth of the room. No fanfare, no recognition, just rosemary and cloth and care. Historians still argue whether these daily folding habits had their own coded meanings. Some say certain shapes indicated what the meal might include. A tight roll could mean meat, a loose triangle, soup. Others claim it was more about mood, a twisted shape for sorrow, a smooth fold for a celebration. But the evidence is slim, and the folds, like their makers, spoke mostly in gestures. One charming tidbit from a small coastal village tells of a superstition. If your daily napkin unfolded on its own during dinner, it meant someone was thinking of you far away. In one surviving letter, a young seamstress writes, "It happened again. The corner slipped into my lap like a whisper. I do hope it's Pietro." Of course, most napkins just did their job. They caught spills, wiped crumbs, got accidentally dropped and lovingly refolded. But that doesn't mean they were unnoticed. In one diary from 1682, a tutor in Bologna writes, "Today I saw the youngest fold the dinner napkins without being asked. She placed them at each spot and smiled. The folds were uneven, but proud. I said nothing, but my heart sang. You linger on that moment. Not the fold, but the feeling behind it." Folding, in these quiet homes, was an act of love. One that required no applause, no guests, no gold-leafed pears. Just a clean square of linen, 2 hands, and the desire to make something beautiful, however fleeting. You move now through a series of smaller rooms. The servants' quarters, the nursemaid's corner, the attic studio where a retired folder, too stiff with age to crease properly, now sketches folds on parchment, her fingers curling with memory. One drawing shows the sorriso piegato, the folded smile. A simple curve, a gentle loop, meant to rest quietly on a plate, unremarkable to most. But to those who knew, it was a greeting, a wish. You are welcome here. Some say this fold originated in convents, where nuns folded napkins into soft curves to avoid anything too ostentatious. Others say it came from widowers who had no one to impress, only memories to honor. Either way, it survived in quiet corners, passed down not in manuals, but by watching someone's hands move just so. You pass one final doorway and peer into a room where an old man sits alone at a table. His dinner is modest: bread, lentils, a single glass of wine. Beside the plate, a napkin folded into a shape only he remembers. He doesn't use it right away. He just looks at it for a long time, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips. Maybe it's a fold he learned in his youth. Maybe one his wife used to make. It doesn't matter. The shape holds more than linen. It holds memory. Because that's what these folds do. They cradle our ordinary days, our quiet meals, our softest habits. They make the everyday sacred without asking for credit. And tonight, as the grand banquet dazzles in another wing, you realize this is where folding lives. Not just in trumpets and dragons, but in triangles folded with tired hands, with love and rosemary. You leave the modest quarters behind, trailing a faint scent of rosemary and starch, and step into a different space entirely. Neither grand nor humble, but ritualistic. You've arrived at the sacred intersection where religion, etiquette, and folding meet. The world of ceremonial napkins. This room is hushed. Thick stone walls, high vaulted ceilings, a single stained glass window casting pale color onto a wooden table at its center. You don't need a guide to know. This is a monastery's refectory. Here, folding wasn't just decorative, it was symbolic, it was spiritual. Unlike the theatrical folds of the noble courts or the practical shapes of the everyday home, ceremonial folds in religious settings were designed to reflect deeper meanings: obedience, purity, humility, order. Every angle pointed toward a virtue. On the table, several folded linens remain. Reproductions, perhaps, or untouched relics of a recent feast day. There's the croce bianca, a cross-shaped fold placed only on the abbot's table. Beside it, the scala umile, the humble staircase, made with 5 accordion pleats meant to represent the slow ascent of the soul toward grace. You lean closer and notice that each pleat has been gently smoothed, again and again. Not for perfection, but for reflection. Historians still argue whether monks truly created these folds themselves, or if they were copied from noble trends and repurposed. Some claim the simpler monastery folds came first, with noble courts merely glamorizing what was originally quiet devotion. Others insist the opposite, that folds filtered into monastic life only after traveling through fashion-obsessed Florence. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between, like most good stories. In some cloisters, a specific folding pattern marked a holy day. During Lent, napkins were folded into narrow scrolls, sometimes bound with twine, to discourage vanity. At Easter they bloomed, literally. One fold, Il Giglio del Risorto, resembled a lily emerging from a stone. It was constructed from layers of linen and a single green herb placed in the center. Symbolic, yes, but also oddly cheerful. a moment of color in an otherwise colorless meal. There's a legend, still whispered among folding devotees, that one convent in Umbria developed a fold so intricate and perfect it was said to guarantee divine favor if presented to a bishop. Called the Scala di Luz, the ladder of light. It took nearly an hour to complete, and was always folded in silence. Today, no complete instructions survive, and many believe the nuns deliberately destroyed them when the convent closed. Some things, perhaps, are too sacred to unfold, but ceremonial folds weren't only for holy days. Funerals, baptisms, name day meals, all had their folds. Each symbol carried subtle weight. A spiral fold, winding inward, might suggest mourning. A folded fan, resting open and low, hinted at modest celebration. And there's something poetic in that. A vocabulary of cloth, spoken softly but understood deeply. You move now to a small cabinet in the room's corner. Inside, a booklet, bound in cracked leather, rests atop a stack of faded napkins. The title, barely visible, Forma dell'anima, Shapes of the Soul. It's a monastic manual of folding practices from the late 1600s. You turn a page and find diagrams drawn with patient ink strokes. Each fold is accompanied by a short meditation. One entry reads, "Fold in half, then again. Let the corners meet like two hands in prayer. Breathe, press gently. This is the shape of patience." You pause. No flourish, no drama, just linen and breath and thought. The next entry shows the fiamma tranquilla, the quiet flame. Not to be confused with the theatrical il fuoco, this version is subtle, low-lying, meant to resemble the steady flicker of a candle's flame during Vespers. The final line says, "For when peace is needed more than fire." You suddenly understand. These weren't folds for display. They were folds for grounding, for honoring the space between moments, for finding calm through ritual. One odd little anecdote survives from a traveling Jesuit's journal. In a cloister in the Dolomites, monks folded a napkin into a long, narrow cone and placed a walnut inside before meals. The fold was called La Promessa, the promise. The walnut was never eaten. It was a reminder of something hard-shelled and hidden, of effort required to find the sweetness within. Guests would take it home and carry it until the shell cracked naturally in their bag. Only then were they permitted to eat it. Theological napkin metaphors, you really didn't see that coming. As the candlelight dims slightly, you reflect on what folding meant in these spaces. It wasn't just about form, it was about intention. Quiet movements made slowly, acts of preparation that softened the noise of daily life and focused the heart. Back in the main hall of the monastery, the long table is being cleared now. The folds are undone. The linens will be laundered, pressed, and stored again. No one applauds, no one notices. But every corner creased with thought becomes a prayer. Every fold made with care becomes something more than a napkin. It becomes a way of saying, "I am here, I see you. I prepared this for you with quiet hands and good heart." And perhaps, as you step back out into the cool courtyard and glance once more at the slowly swaying laundry lines, you realize something simple and lovely. The art of folding isn't about impressing. It's about remembering to care. The courtyard is cool beneath your feet, and a breeze carries the soft scent of soap, basil, and a hint of smoke from the kitchen fires. You move toward another wing of the palazzo, a place less sacred than the monastery, but no less rich in tradition. You've now arrived at the domain of the guilds, the bustling, ambitious, and fiercely meticulous world of the professional linen folders. Yes, there were guilds, and yes, folding had its own. This section of the city hums with craft and commerce. Tailors, cobblers, illuminators, and just down a narrow stone alley, A small door bearing a sign with an embroidered napkin and a pair of open hands. Compagnia dei Piegatori di Firenze, the folding company of Florence. Inside, it's warm and a little dusty, with bolts of cloth stacked like miniature city walls and a long table scratched by decades of concentrated effort. This was no casual club. This was a trade house where young apprentices trained under master folders learned the precise creases, the chemical mysteries of starch, and, most importantly, the performance of patience. You picture it now. A teenage boy, fidgety, tasked with folding a simple triangle. He misses the corner by a hair's breadth. A withered master raises one eyebrow. No words are spoken. The boy refolds, again and again, until the crease is clean enough to slice moonlight. Guild members weren't just hobbyists. They were essential. Banquets didn't run without them. Nobles consulted them for seasonal fold recommendations, royal weddings booked them months in advance, and foreign dignitaries sometimes tried to steal them away with offers of gold, silk, or secret recipes for almond biscuits. Historians still argue whether guilds had official folding exams. Some say yes. Apprentices had to perform 5 standard folds, blindfolded, and 1 original creation of their own design. Others claim that's a romantic exaggeration born from the memoirs of a particularly boastful Genoese folder named Bartolomeo, whose autobiography contains no fewer than 3 references to folding with tears in my eyes and joy in my soul. Either way, standards were high, and creativity even higher. The guild fostered innovation. Folders competed, quietly, respectfully, with the occasional passive-aggressive eyebrow raise, for the most unique design of the season. A fold that mimicked a lute. A napkin that unfolded into a tiny pop-up arch. One ambitious folder crafted a fold with 3 hidden pockets. One held a sugared almond, the second a sprig of thyme, and the third, a paper fortune. Not every guest found all 3, which led to some smug chewing. But the guild wasn't all starch and applause. There were feuds. Oh yes. One of the more infamous disagreements arose in 1671 between 2 senior members, Maestro Lorenzo, known for his rigid geometry, and Signora Elena, who favored natural, flowing forms. The battleground? A noble family's engagement feast. Lorenzo insisted on the fiore piegato, a crisp, 6-pointed floral pattern that looked like something you might find in a snowflake. Elena countered with the petalo caduto, the fallen petal, a single curve fold that mimicked a rose drifting from a vine. After several tense meetings and one unfortunate starch spill, the client was forced to intervene. They chose fans. Elegant. Neutral. Nobody happy. Guild politics aside, the folders took immense pride in their work. Some kept sketchbooks filled with diagrams, notes, fold variations. A few even composed poetry to accompany their favorite designs. One such verse, found scribbled in the margin of a battered linen manual, reads, "Fold not for praise, nor passing glance, but for the stillness of the dance, where cloth and thought in silence meet, to make a guest feel calm and sweet." You'd think these artists might sign their work, but oddly, they rarely did. Folds were anonymous offerings, like little prayers made from thread. Occasionally, a master might leave a subtle mark, a tiny embroidered dot, a curved hem, a hidden stitch. But mostly, the art was its own reward. And yet, there were rivalries between cities too. Florentine folders claimed technical supremacy. Venetians boasted flair and drama. Milan's guilds leaned toward precision and scale, while those from Bologna were known for playful, almost mischievous creations, folds that included riddles or surprise scent sachets. You can imagine the tension when these styles clashed at a royal banquet that pulled artists from across the peninsula. One account describes an awkward moment when a Florentine fan was placed beside a Venetian gondola-shaped napkin. The folds didn't match. Neither did the egos. Yet in the guild archives, some preserved, many lost, you find hints of collaboration too. Notes shared between cities. Diagrams passed in secret. One dusty letter reads, "To my brother in folds, here is the new twist you requested. May it bring peace to your patrons and envy to your rivals." You pause to imagine the lives of these quiet artists. Not knights or painters, but people who found joy in corners and angles, who devoted their lives to temporary beauty, knowing full well it would be undone before the main course. There's a drawer here, labeled Maestri Caduti, the Fallen Masters. Inside, pages of folds no longer used, designs too complex, too fragile, or simply unfashionable. The Campana Invertita, the inverted bell, the Albero Soffiato, the blown tree, and one especially odd sketch labeled only Il Riccio Solitario, the lonely hedgehog. A joke? A failure? A forgotten masterpiece? No one knows. But even the abandoned folds hold dignity. Each one was once dreamt, crafted, placed with care. And that's what the guild stood for. Not perfection, but intention. Not just the how of folding, but the why. Because behind every crisp edge, every smoothed line, was a quiet invitation. Sit. Stay. Be at peace. Someone made this for you, with their best hands. And even now, centuries later, those hands still linger, folded gently into the linen corners of time. The last folds of the guild have barely faded from view before you step into a different and somewhat stickier part of napkin history. The kitchens. Yes, dear traveler, beyond the banquets, beyond the poetry and pageantry, lies the humbler world where folds met food in far less glamorous ways. You find yourself in the working heart of a Baroque estate. A large, warm kitchen filled with clatter and bustle, though now it is quiet, its ghosts politely waiting for you to notice them. The air smells faintly of garlic, ash, and old flour. Copper pots line the walls, and along a sideboard are several worn but clean napkins, folded not for flair, but for function. Because here, napkins were not just for guests. They were tools, shields, lifesavers, secret keepers. Consider this. A kitchen boy reaches for a hot iron pot. No mitts exist, not really. Not yet. Instead, he grabs the corner of a linen napkin, wraps it around his hand, and lifts. It's slightly scorched by the time he's done, and someone will sigh about it later. But for now, the meal continues. Folded cloth as armor. Over by the ovens, a cook wipes her brow with one napkin, then uses a differently folded one, set aside earlier in a specific fan shape, as a marker. That fan fold? It indicates that the pheasant dish is seasoned but not yet sauced. A quick visual system, understood by every trained cook in the room. Efficient, silent, essential. Historians still debate how formalized these kitchen signals were. Some claim large estates had full napkin codebooks, fan folds for readiness, triangle folds for finished dishes, spiral rolls for dishes to be reheated. Others suggest it was more organic, individual to each kitchen, evolving like a sourdough starter over time. Most likely, it was both, and napkins weren't only for signals, they were containers. In many Baroque kitchens, chefs used folded linens to carry herbs, sugar, or salt from storeroom to stove. Think of them as early Tupperware. Soft, fragrant, and infinitely reusable. A pinch of cinnamon? Wrapped in a triangle fold, tucked behind the ear. Fresh parsley? Swaddled in damp linen to keep it cool and bright for the midday roast. One curious tidbit appears in the notebook of an aristocratic chef in Parma. He folded a napkin to conceal a surprise treat for the children of the house each Sunday. a sugared fig, a honeyed nut, even a tiny carved animal made from marzipan. The fold changed each week: a miniature dragon, a delicate pouch, a folded peacock tail. The children never knew what shape or surprise they'd find. The chef referred to the practice as il gioco delle pieghe, the folding game. Elsewhere, a fold served a more mischievous purpose. In Naples, it was said that a clever cook could hide a scathing note to the steward inside a folded napkin, using a giro torto, a twisted circle fold that allowed the paper to be wedged deep inside. The note might read, "Too little rosemary again," or more daringly, "Your cousin watered the wine." Passive-aggressive linen espionage. And then there was scent. Napkins soaked in rosewater or vinegar were folded and held near the nose when the meat course arrived. Not because the meat was bad, but because some kitchens took liberties with seasoning. The panno profumato, or scented cloth, was folded in a tight clover shape and placed discreetly under the edge of a charger. A guest could reach down, unfold it slightly, and inhale, reclaiming their appetite before facing the overly peppered mutton. One charming entry from a Venetian hostess's journal notes, "The Count found the carp too fragrant by far. Thank heavens I remembered to offer him the lemon blossom fold." You glance now at a small side table in the corner of the kitchen. It holds a stack of worn, patch-repaired napkins folded in a way you haven't seen before. Crumpled, yes, but layered with deliberate tucks, almost like a sleeping child tucked in 3 times. This, you realize, was the folding pattern used for kitchen breaks, what we might call a staff meal. The folds weren't fancy, but they meant something. Time to rest. You picture a tired scullery maid slumping onto a stool, unfolding one such napkin, and finding a heel of bread, a smear of soft cheese, and the small, quiet mercy of 10 minutes peace. It's easy to forget that food doesn't only travel from kitchen to plate. It leaves behind scraps, smells, memories. And here, napkins carried those too. A tear wiped by a linen square tucked in an apron. A singed fold that marked the time the goose caught fire, and the guests politely pretended not to notice. A napkin used to muffle a fit of laughter when the steward tripped over a dog and sent custard into a bishop's lap. No one folds those moments on purpose, but the linen remembers. One final drawer holds what looks like a collection of failed folds. Napkins stained or torn, some roughly triangular, others only loosely gathered. But a closer look reveals something else. These were the folds used for tasting. Before a dish reached the banquet table, it passed through several tasters, servants, stewards, sometimes even the head chef himself. Each taster used a corner of linen to touch, sample, then wipe the spoon. Not out of fear of poison, though that wasn't entirely off the table. No, it was etiquette, cleanliness, a strange, quiet reverence for the dish to come. You imagine a single folded corner absorbing the taste of every course in miniature. A ghost meal, a fold-by-fold journey of the evening's flavors. And so, while guests marveled at folded swans and scented roses, the cooks folded with purpose, not for glory or applause, but to keep the kitchen running, the food flowing, and the chaos, mostly, under control. Because here in the heat, in the smoke and the clatter, the fold wasn't art, it was survival. You ease out of the kitchen now, cheeks a little flushed from the imagined heat, and step into a calmer, more genteel space. The drawing room, perhaps, or the private salon of a fashionable Baroque lady. The scent here is lighter. Lavender, beeswax polish, a touch of powdered wig. The floor creaks politely beneath your steps. Welcome to the world of leisurely folding, where napkins became both pastime and personal expression. Not every fold happened in preparation for a feast. Some were born in the quiet spaces between lessons, letters, or late afternoon tea. This was where folding became intimate, thoughtful, even flirtatious. You find yourself in a sunlit corner where a small table is scattered with embroidery hoops, a half-read romance novel in French, and, yes, napkins, half-folded, resting like drowsy birds. A lady's world, as they used to say, though that phrase does little justice to the quiet artistry taking shape here. Picture a noblewoman in Rome, her day's obligations completed. A polite walk in the garden, a tedious lesson in harpsichord, a passive-aggressive letter from her sister in Naples. She sits now by the window, linen square in hand, folding not for dinner, but for delight. She's attempting the giglio serpentino, a tricky design that winds like a lily's stem and ends in a ruffled bloom. It's said to be impossible without a touch of moisture and a very steady hand. She fails twice. On the third attempt, the shape holds. She smiles, genuinely, and sets it on the sill to dry, as proud as any sculptor. These folds weren't destined for banquet tables. They were kept in journals, tucked into drawers, passed between friends. They were the original idle hands projects, equal parts fidget and flirtation. Historians still debate how common this pastime truly was. Some argue it was an elite pursuit, limited to women with time and linen to spare. Others believe it filtered down more widely, becoming a form of soft expression across class lines. And then there are the skeptics, who dismiss the whole practice as the invention of romantic novelists. Still, diary entries, folded examples, and marginal doodles suggest otherwise. You notice a folded square on a low stool. It's shaped like a tiny boat, complete with a triangle sail and a flag. Next to it, a note, faded and delicate, that reads, "When you miss him, fold the sail and let it drift." Romantic? Of course. Useful? Not in the least. But these folds weren't about function. They were gestures, hints, sometimes secrets. One delightful example from Florence tells of the piegatura del sospetto, the fold of suspicion. It involved a simple triangle, folded over a concealed note. The angle of the final tuck indicated the writer's mood, hopeful, worried, indifferent. A sharp left meant heartbreak. A soft right? Desire. The folds were passed quietly between fans, gloves, or handkerchiefs at court gatherings, what we might now call historical texting. There's even record of folding games. During long evenings, especially when chaperones were present and conversations had to remain suitable for delicate ears, young people would challenge each other to create the most inventive napkin shape using only one hand. The winner received a compliment, a ribbon, or, if scandal permitted, a whispered promise of a walk in the orchard the next morning. You open a slim book resting on a dressing table. Inside, a handwritten collection titled Piegature d'anima e di cuore, Folds of the Soul and Heart. It contains no practical instructions, just sketches and little poems, like fold a kiss into a square, tuck it soft with linen care. Hide it where the bread is warm. Let him find it. That's the charm. Charming, yes. Perhaps a little ridiculous, but also deeply human. These folds weren't meant to impress nobility or entertain bishops. They were small, personal declarations. I was here. I felt something. I folded it into cloth. One especially curious anecdote survives from 1694, involving a minor duchess in Siena who claimed to predict dreams based on napkin folds. She would visit guests the morning after a feast, examine their crumpled napkins, and pronounce cryptic fortunes. "Ah, you've dreamt of water," or "Beware the crooked goose." Whether she had true insight or simply enjoyed the attention is anyone's guess, but her salon was always full. Unless you think these folds were confined to women, think again. Men, especially those with courtly ambitions, practiced the art too, sometimes to impress, sometimes simply to amuse themselves during long council meetings. One surviving letter from a bored ambassador mentions, "Spent the afternoon folding napkins into horses while the envoy from Madrid droned on about fisheries. My steed collapsed, but I remain undefeated." You smile, imagining a room full of solemn, wigged men, each secretly folding napkins behind their portfolios. Not every fold was so whimsical. Some were used in mourning, folded birds with wings turned down, or knots meant to symbolize the holding in of grief. Others were celebratory, folded suns for weddings, open hands for births, abstract blooms for name days. None of it was required. All of it was chosen. And as you glance around this cozy room, this intimate gallery of private folding, you feel something softer than spectacle. These folds aren't trying to be remembered. They simply are. A folded crescent set on a windowsill, a tiny fan resting in a jewelry box, a half-formed goose on a tea tray, as if abandoned mid-flight. No one wrote manuals for these. No diagrams survive in grand archives. But they mattered, because they belonged to someone. A fold, after all, is just the memory of movement. A gesture, paused in fabric. And sometimes that's enough. The folds of flirtation and poetry drift behind you like a sigh through lace curtains. And now you move into an altogether different environment. One buzzing not with romance or reverence, but with business, negotiation, and endless ledgers. Welcome to the merchant halls and counting houses of Baroque Italy, where even napkins played a part in trade. Here, folding wasn't about beauty or devotion, it was about utility. You step into a timber-beamed room that smells faintly of ink, beeswax, and ambition. The walls are lined with shelves, each stacked with ledgers bound in leather, sacks of spice, bolts of linen, and, peculiarly, bundled napkins, each folded in a specific pattern. These napkins aren't destined for anyone's lap. They're samples, codes, contracts folded in cloth. You approach a large oak desk, its surface worn smooth by decades of calculation. A folded napkin sits neatly on top, an accordion style with a small coin tucked in the final fold. This, you soon learn, was known as the fazzoletto d'accordo, the agreement cloth. In many merchant circles, a folded napkin served as a preliminary token of intent, especially when language, distance, or politics made written agreements more delicate. A trader from Venice might fold a napkin into a fan and press it into the hands of a Turkish counterpart. If the fold was accepted, and not altered, it symbolized mutual understanding. The coin? A deposit of trust. Symbolic, yes, but also strangely effective. One fold, one coin, one handshake. Ship the goods. Historians still argue whether these folding customs were standardized, or if they varied by port and profession. Some evidence points to region-specific folds, triangles in Genoa, long rectangular rolls in Palermo, double-twist loops in Livorno. Others argue it was more individual, each fold representing a merchant's house, a sort of linen logo. And of course some just think merchants were being dramatic. But really, in a world where every peppercorn could mean a profit or a loss, every detail mattered, including how you folded your sample cloth. You walk past crates of goods bound for export, silk, oil, glass, dried citrus, and piles of neatly pressed napkins destined not for tables, but for trade partners. In Florence, a weaver might include a folded napkin with a new pattern in each shipment, not just to demonstrate craftsmanship, but to leave a signature. Proof that a human hand had shaped something for a distant eye to read. And in this world of symbols, folds sometimes served as a courier's shorthand. If a folded napkin arrived with its right corner tucked under, it meant prices unchanged. Left corner forward? Prices had dropped. A folded rose, rare but not unheard of, indicated that a contract had been rejected, but gracefully. no hard feelings. The linen equivalent of a polite shrug. One delightful oddity survives in a merchant's inventory from Bologna, a listing for folded napkins with clove inside to accompany delayed payments. Apparently, the spice acted as a peace offering. "We're late, but sweetly so," it seemed to say. Imagine your utility bill arriving in a folded fan scented with cinnamon. It might soften the sting. In more upscale trade circles, napkin folds even appeared in early product catalogs. One silk dealer included an insert showing potential clients how to fold his fabric into a crane, a sunburst, or a ribbon twist. Clever marketing for an era before brochures. A note at the bottom read, "If it holds the shape, the quality holds your trust." Of course, not everyone appreciated the folding flair. A famously cranky Venetian accountant once wrote, "I care not if your linen dances like angels. I care only if it stains like iron." He was promptly sent a napkin folded into a devil with a note, "May your soup be thin forever." Business burned slowly, but the jokes remain. The folds also appeared at trade fairs, where merchants set up stalls displaying their best goods, each accompanied by napkins folded in patterns that matched the product. A fan for perfumes, a wrapped bundle for spices, a spiraled knot for cheeses aged in caves. And yes, there was competition. Rival traders occasionally copied folds from each other, claiming them as their own. There were even folding scandals, rumors of bribes to folding apprentices, sneaky pattern thefts, and one infamous accusation involving a disputed double-loop knot that ended with two merchants refusing to eat at the same inn for 20 years. You reach a back room now, quieter than the rest. Here, napkins are stored in drawers labeled not by pattern, but by emotion. Trust, decline, delay, hopeful, urgent. It's like a filing cabinet of mood, in cloth. You pull open the hopeful drawer and find several napkins folded into upward fans, each bearing a small stitched mark. A rising sun, a seed, a wave. Silent optimism, stored in cotton. One fascinating tidbit comes from a letter written by a Dutch trader to his Italian partner. "Your cloth folded into the rising pocket brings me great peace. I shall double my order. Also, your apricots were excellent." Even amid invoices and margins, a good fold could make someone smile. You can almost imagine these merchants, weary from travel and tariffs, taking a moment at the end of the day to refold a napkin with care. Not because they had to, but because it was part of the ritual. A gentle punctuation to a day filled with numbers. Because folding, even in trade, was more than gesture. It was language. A way of saying, "This matters. I saw you. I folded this by hand." And in a world of coins and contracts, that mattered. You leave the counting house behind, its scents of ink and cloves still lingering faintly, and step into a space where linen folded not for elegance, prayer, or business, but for survival. You've entered the underworld of the Baroque city, hidden corners, servant quarters, alleyway dens, where napkins became instruments of improvisation, stealth, and sometimes soft rebellion. It's quiet here, dim and close. You duck beneath a low archway into a room no grander than a stable stall, but with shelves of folded cloth stacked carefully in rows. These aren't noble heirlooms or trade samples. They are scraps, usable, functional, patched over and over, folded not to impress, but to solve problems. In these spaces, napkins were the Swiss Army knives of the underclass. A servant might fold one to cradle hot coals from the kitchen fire, transferring warmth to an upstairs chamber without so much as a whimper of smoke. A laundress, elbow-deep in soap and river water, might fold one lengthwise, knot it twice, and wear it as a head wrap to keep the sun off her neck. A folded triangle might serve as an improvised sling for a twisted wrist, or a hidden pouch for the few coins she'd stashed after market. Historians still argue just how creative these folds became. Some believe the folds were passed down orally among servants, Little coded solutions whispered in laundries and stables. Others think they developed independently as the need arose. There's even speculation about household folding dialects, where certain patterns meant different things in different noble homes. A spiral fold in one household might mean extra washing, while in another it marked don't touch for the master only. And then there were the hidden folds, the ones not intended to be seen. Tales tell of maids folding messages into napkins, barely visible tucks that spelled out warnings or requests. One surviving example from Ferrara involved a triangular fold with 3 corner pinches. The message? He's coming early, clear the room. Another, more mysterious, involved a fold so elaborate it was mistaken for a decorative centerpiece, until the letter inside sparked a minor family scandal involving 2 footmen, a missing necklace, and 1 stolen kiss. It's easy to overlook, but these napkins weren't made from endless bolts of fresh linen. They were reused, patched, sometimes boiled until soft and gray from years of work. One was folded into a pouch to carry herbs. Another, shaped into a swan, was used not for a guest but to distract a fussy toddler while the wet nurse took a break. Folding, for these workers, was resourcefulness disguised as ritual. In Naples, a common fold among kitchen boys was the bocca cieca, the blind mouth. It looked like a rolled tube, but with a flap at one end. Inside, leftover food could be hidden and carried home. Entire generations of workers likely fed themselves off what fit in that tiny, clever fold. And there's something humbling, something deeply human about that. Because while noblewomen perfected lilies and monks meditated over fan creases, these folds were raw, urgent, designed to get through another day with one's dignity intact. You pass by a wall of hooks where aprons once hung. On one hook still rests a folded cloth, a pocket fold tied tightly with string. You open it slowly and find a tiny sewing kit inside. 2 needles, a loop of black thread, and a scrap of silk ribbon. This wasn't just a napkin. It was a survival kit, possibly carried by a seamstress who mended gowns in secret, paid in silver and silence. There's a story from a servant journal in Siena, a rare find, about a folded square called La Salvezza, the salvation. The writer claims it was taught to her by an older kitchen maid. Fold in half, then again, then tuck a prayer between the layers, she writes. When things are bad, hold it under your tongue until the master passes. He won't see you. He won't ask. Was it superstition? Disguise? Maybe both. But it shows how folding became a quiet defense, a kind of protective talisman wrapped in starch and sweat. Sometimes the folds were even humorous. There's an anecdote, almost certainly true, about a footman who folded napkins into frogs and left them hopping across his master's dining table. He was dismissed for indecorous folding, though later letters suggest the master chuckled about it for weeks. The servant? Rehired. Sometimes folds said what voices could not. And while these folds weren't written down or saved in linen manuals, they lived. In the rhythms of daily life, passed from hand to hand. A folded square left on a windowsill to signal that dinner was late. A fan fold placed upside down to say, "He's drunk." Again. A tightly rolled napkin with a knot in the middle, used to press into a sore shoulder after hours at the millstone. They might not appear in court records or noble inventories, but these folds were no less important than their ornate cousins. In fact, in some ways, they mattered more, because they carried meaning, not ceremony or decoration, but survival, support, sisterhood. You sit now on a bench near the hearth, the stone still warm. A folded napkin rests nearby, plain and soft, its edges worn thin by time and touch. You lift it, feel the weight of 100 uses, 1,000 creases, each one made with purpose. There's no flourish, no fanfare, just fabric, folded in quiet defiance of a world that rarely noticed. And in that softness you feel something unspoken, resilience folded into linen. A whispered promise. I was here, I endured, I folded this because I had to. You rise from the stone hearth and drift now toward a quieter space again. Quieter in sound, but not in purpose. The Baroque drawing rooms and kitchens fade behind you, and now you find yourself standing in a grand, echoing archive. Not a library exactly, but a repository of knowledge, memory, and, to your gentle surprise, folds. This is the realm of the scholars. Not monks or mystics this time, but linen lovers of a more eccentric stripe. Amateur antiquarians, folding theorists, artistic obsessives who believed that the napkin, humble though it might be, deserved to be studied, catalogued, and preserved. The walls here are lined with shelves of carefully labeled volumes, diagrams pinned beneath glass, and linen samples preserved in drawers with faint notes in fading ink. You approach one and read, Florence, 1682. Fold, Croce di Sale. Creator, unknown. Purpose, speculative. Beneath the note lies a napkin shaped like a salt cross, its corners lifted slightly, as though ready to float. The first thing you realize is that these people took folding very seriously. These weren't servants or noble hosts folding for practice or beauty. These were individuals determined to treat the act of napkin folding as an intellectual discipline, on par with architecture, rhetoric, or even cartography. One of the most famous of these figures was a man named Signore Tommaso del Riso, a former mathematics tutor from Padua who became utterly obsessed with the geometry of the fold. He wrote no fewer than 4 volumes on the subject, with titles like Angles of the Aperitif and Napkins as Euclidean Witnesses. His diagrams, some laughably overcomplicated, suggest that every fold could be measured, replicated, and even plotted against a star chart. Whether anyone ever followed his instructions remains unclear. Historians still argue whether Del Riso was a genius, a joke, or both. His most ambitious claim? That there were precisely 144 natural folds, corresponding to the harmonic ratios found in cathedral architecture. No one's managed to verify this, but a few enthusiastic doctoral theses have tried. You move to another section now, filled with more tactile exhibits. A box labeled Imitative Folds contains napkins shaped like objects, a lute, a slipper, a chicken leg. Beneath each is a tiny card noting its origin and presumed maker. Many are anonymous. A few carry famous names. There's a fold attributed to Artemisia Gentileschi, not the painter herself, but her niece, apparently fond of turning dinner napkins into dramatic busts of Roman goddesses. Her most famous? A fold named Minerva Frowns, which includes an upward peak meant to resemble a stern brow. You run your fingers over one of the better preserved examples, marveling not just at the shape, but at the care it took to record it. Someone folded this centuries ago. Someone else thought it mattered enough to write down. A quieter case in the corner contains anonymous folds. These are the orphans. Beautiful, complex, but with no known creator, no associated event, no matching recipe or noble name. Just folded cloth and mystery. One particularly strange example is a square twisted into something like a funnel. The tag reads simply, Napkin from an unknown feast, found in Bologna. Theories include hat, funnel, or small dog. The ambiguity somehow makes it more delightful. And oh, the notes these scholars left behind. One reads, This fold appears only in the margins of cookbooks between 1670 and 1685. Its purpose is unclear. My guess? Spice containment. Another, written in tight, determined handwriting. This configuration mimics the early Baroque cello. There is no chance this is accidental. You pass a diagram drawn in red ink, annotated in Latin, that proposes an entire philosophy of napkin folding: subtilitas, utilitas, and inevitabilitas. The sense that a fold, once made, could not have been otherwise. It's either brilliant or completely absurd. Maybe both. Then there are the crossover scholars, those who compared napkin folds to architectural forms, theater curtain designs, even early medical diagrams. One claimed the folds mirrored the curves of the human rib cage, proof that dining was a form of anatomical homage. Another believed that proper napkin arrangement promoted digestion, a theory that included extensive charts, several unsettling digestive illustrations, and one suspicious quote from Hippocrates. You find an open book on a pedestal, its pages lined with thin sketches and fold names: the kissed corner, crescent nest, the woundless arrow. Each fold is paired with a note about what kind of guest it suited. The woundless arrow, for example, was recommended for men of tense demeanor who require easing. The crescent nest was apparently ideal for new mothers and fragile poets, a whole culture of classification. A strange, gentle taxonomy of the folded world. There's a corner of the room marked reconstructed folds, attempts by modern scholars to recreate lost techniques based only on mentions in letters or half-finished diagrams. You spot one labeled the dolente spirale, or the spiral of sorrow. It's unclear what made the original sorrowful. Perhaps it unfurled with a slow, deliberate sigh. Or perhaps the creator just had a very bad lunch. You chuckle softly, realizing that someone spent hours, even days, trying to bring it back. Refolding, adjusting, sighing, trying again. And here lies the gentle truth behind all this scholarly obsession. To fold something is to believe it's worth remembering. To spend time on something ephemeral is to say, this moment mattered, even if only for a breath. As you move towards the far end of the archive, you come upon a display titled simply, Last Folds. Each napkin in this case was found abandoned, left at the end of a feast, a voyage, a life. One is from a hospital, another from a shipwreck, another from a villa closed during a plague, each folded quietly, each preserved. There are no fanfares here, no guests, just cloth, creased by hand, echoing silently across time. And perhaps in a way these scholars were right, not because they mapped folds to planetary orbits or designed folding systems for melancholy, but because they looked. They noticed. They believed that even the smallest crease told a story. And now so do you. From the dusty stillness of the archive, you step back into a world of movement. Though this time, the folding isn't for table settings, kitchens, or flirtation. Instead, it's part of a performance. You've wandered into a Baroque theater, where linen doesn't just rest on plates, it dances. The year is 1703. You find yourself backstage, peeking behind heavy velvet curtains, where a cast of powdered actors and elegant stagehands prepare for a night of spectacle. The theater is alive with rustling fabric, whispered cues, and the faint smell of oranges and candle wax. But here's the surprise. Even on stage, napkin folding had its moment. This was the age of operatic grandeur, scenes of royal banquets, heavenly feasts, and comic misunderstandings at the dinner table. And in these moments, actors didn't just pretend to dine. They folded, theatrically and sometimes absurdly, for the audience's delight. You spot a prop table laid out mid-scene. On it, an enormous linen napkin folded like a giant cabbage. The character, some haughty noble, will pretend to mistake it for a real vegetable. A small joke, scripted in linen. When he pulls it apart, a plum rolls out. The audience roars, or at least titters, depending on how much wine they've had. This kind of napkin comedy was surprisingly common in the theater of the day. Farces and comedies often used exaggerated folding as part of the joke. A character might attempt a swan and produce something resembling a soggy shoe. Another might boast about their folding technique while a rival quietly turns out a masterpiece behind their back. Like juggling or dancing, napkin folding became a physical bit, something familiar to the audience, exaggerated for laughs. Historians still debate whether these stage folds were based on real ones from noble banquets or invented just for effect. Some argue that stagehands studied the latest court trends to parody them. Others claim actors created their own flamboyant versions, what one critic dubbed culinary mimecraft. One playbill from a Milanese comedy in 1706 advertises a character described simply as Il Maestro del Pano, the napkin master. His entire role? Folding napkins on stage while narrating scandals through metaphor. This triangle fold? My cousin's shame. This twist? My uncle's debts. The role was so popular it was copied in Paris and Vienna, though the French version involved significantly more ribbons. Off-stage, napkin folding also appeared in puppet theaters, often the Punch and Judy-style setups found in city squares and market stalls. A tiny cloth swan might be used as a puppet bride. A fan fold turned into a collapsing chair. Children squealed. Adults rolled their eyes, then chuckled anyway. But folding wasn't only used for comedy. In more serious dramas, napkins could carry symbolic weight. A folded square passed from one actor to another might represent a marriage offer. An unfolded, crumpled napkin dropped to the floor? Betrayal? Refusal? There's even a preserved script fragment where a noblewoman silently folds a napkin during a tense negotiation. The stage direction reads, "She folds slowly. It is the only moment she controls." It wasn't lost on audiences that folding was a power move. Quiet, controlled, deliberate. And on a candlelit stage where every movement mattered, that kind of silent message could be louder than a monologue. You move further into the wings, and a trunk catches your eye. Inside are dozens of old practice linens, stage napkins, heavier than usual, weighted for easier handling under lights. Many are frayed from years of folding and unfolding. Some are embroidered with little symbols, suns, masks, teardrops, props. Yes, but also characters in their own right. You find a small booklet wedged between two folded fans. It's a performer's notebook filled with diagrams and rehearsal notes. One page reads, "If the audience laughs too soon, delay the last twist. If they're restless, fold faster." Another, "Remember, the goose must always wobble. That's where the laugh lives." And tucked in the back, a scrap of folded linen with the words, "In silence, a fold can scream." It's unclear if this is a line from a play or just something the actor believed. Baroque theater was all about illusion, transformation. A painted sky could become a sea. A wig could become a disguise. And in the midst of it all, napkins, those seemingly mundane pieces of cloth, became tools of storytelling. One of the most legendary fold moments came from a 1711 production in Venice, where a character dramatically unrolled a napkin to reveal another folded napkin. And inside that, yet another napkin, this one shaped like a skull. The audience gasped, then applauded. The symbolism was clear. Layers of meaning, layers of deceit. Plus, the actor did it all one-handed while delivering a soliloquy about mortality. Even today, theater historians refer to that moment as the nested napkin monologue. There's something delightful in the idea that folding, a small domestic act, could be blown up for theatrical drama. That a swan made of linen could represent love, betrayal, ambition, or comic folly, depending on who folded it and why. And it reminds you that folding isn't just preparation, it's performance. A moment of intention, witnessed, a transformation, paused. As you walk past the darkened stage and into the auditorium, you imagine an audience dressed in powdered wigs and velvet, watching with rapt attention as someone folds a napkin into a rose, then crushes it slowly between their fingers. No words, just cloth, just meaning. And whether the audience laughed or sighed or sat stunned in silence, the fold did its job. It told a story. You step away from the footlights, leaving behind the echo of laughter and dramatic sighs, and wander into a more serene, sun-dappled space. You're not in a theater now, nor a grand hall. You're in a garden, a Baroque garden, of course, where the air smells of rosemary and lemon balm, and even the birds seem politely well-rehearsed. And yet, even here, among the gravel paths and carefully clipped hedges, the napkin continues its strange little journey. Welcome to the world of picnic folding. It's not the first thing you'd associate with the Baroque era. When you think of those centuries, you likely imagine powdered wigs and 12-course meals under gilded ceilings, not casual alfresco dining on soft grass. But the truth is, noble and merchant classes alike were quietly obsessed with the idea of eating outdoors, particularly in spring and early summer. It wasn't picnicking the way we do it today, no plastic forks or lemonade in thermoses, but rather a curated seasonal ritual known in Italy as colazione all'aperto, or open-air breakfast, though it could last until dusk and involve everything from stewed fruit to roasted partridge. And at the heart of it all, the napkin. You find a woven basket tucked under a fig tree. Inside, pressed linens folded into neat little shapes. One is a pouch holding candied almonds. Another is folded into a twist that opens like a blooming flower to reveal slices of cheese. There's a triangle enclosing thin strips of cured ham. Everything is tidy, elegant, and most of all, portable. This was folding with purpose. These napkins didn't just sit under plates. They served as wrappers, carriers, dividers, and sometimes even plates themselves. Historians still argue whether these picnic folds were innovations of kitchen staff trying to make transport easier, or clever designs commissioned by hosts eager to impress. Some letters from Milanese estates describe entire picnic sets, with napkins pre-folded to specific contents, dried fruit in a rosa piegata, bread in the mezza luna, and herbs tucked into a nodo gentile. Each fold had a function, and often a flourish. Because even in nature, the Baroque mind couldn't resist a bit of showmanship. One of the more delightful records comes from a guest journal dated 1708. The Duke's gardens were fine, the weather forgiving, and the folding exceptional. I opened a napkin shaped like a lamb and found it stuffed with fig tarts. The lamb did not survive. You can almost see it. Laughter beneath arched pergolas, wine cooled in fountains, guests delighting in the simple surprise of a goose-shaped napkin revealing a still warm custard pastry. It was edible theater outside. Even children had their own folds, smaller napkins shaped into fish or pinwheels, often holding sugared nuts or little charms. One fold, the Gabbiano Curioso, flapped when you pulled its corners, guaranteed to distract a restless child long enough for their parents to enjoy a sip of cordial. And it wasn't just about delight. Folding outdoors served practical needs too. A folded pouch could protect pastries from ants. A layered square could cushion fruit in a basket. One popular fold, the Collo del Pavone, held herbs with stems down, keeping them upright and fresh in transport, like a little bouquet wrapped in linen. Some servants became known for their outdoor folding artistry. A particularly celebrated gardener's assistant in Lucca was so skilled at picnic folds that guests would request napkins by Nando days in advance. His specialty, the vino nascosto, a fold that disguised a small bottle of wine inside a linen chicken. Unsurprisingly, that one was often reused. And of course there was a little friendly competition among host families. One lady from Parma was famous for her stagione a sorpresa fold. 4 layers representing the seasons, each containing a different delicacy. Spring greens, summer fruit, autumn nuts, winter cheese, Guests would unfold it like a map of the year, smiling all the while. You pause now beside a marble bench, watching imaginary guests fan themselves lazily with their now empty napkins. A soft breeze moves through the citrus trees. Somewhere, a lute is playing a song no one remembers. And that's part of the charm, isn't it? Because these folds weren't made to last. They were ephemeral, beautiful and gone in the time it took to finish a pear tart. But that's what made them magical. Folding, unfolding, eating, chatting. Life enjoyed one crease at a time. There's even a lovely poem, scribbled in the margin of a guest book from Bologna, about one such picnic. Fold me once and let me rest, with almonds hidden in my chest. Fold me twice and I shall keep your apricots in linen sleep. But fold me thrice and then you'll see. A ring, a note, a kiss from me. A kiss folded in cloth. Not a bad idea. In some cases, these folds even served as invitations. A noblewoman might send a napkin folded into a fan containing a pressed violet and a handwritten note. Tomorrow, by the lilies. Bring an appetite. Not quite as efficient as a Google Calendar invite, but considerably more romantic. Even as you sit here, you begin to appreciate how the outdoor fold was different from its indoor cousin. Indoors, napkin folding could be rigid, ceremonial, formal. Outdoors, it was playful, adaptable, maybe even a little mischievous. There are stories of guests secretly rearranging their folds while hosts weren't looking, swapping a bird for a fish or a pouch for a flower, just to keep things lively. One gentleman reportedly folded his napkin into a crown and wore it for the duration of an entire feast, claiming diplomatic immunity from dishwashing duties. He was apparently only half joking. And now, as the imaginary sun dips behind those tall cypress trees and the breeze grows softer, you fold your napkin one last time. Not into a fan, or a goose, or a spiraled tower. Just a simple square. Because sometimes, after all that Baroque drama, it's nice to return to something plain. Clean, quiet. Like the moment after a meal, like the pause between conversations. Like the hush that comes just before sleep. The sun slips behind the garden wall, and you rise slowly, napkin still warm from your hand, and wander once more. This time toward an altogether stranger domain. You're no longer in palaces or theaters or herb-scented gardens. Now, you descend a stone stairwell beneath a quiet townhouse in Siena and step into a cool, echoing chamber. This is a laundry cellar, not a poetic one. Not a place of delicate embroidery or artistic musings. This is the belly of the Baroque household, where linen was boiled, beaten, bleached, and sometimes, just occasionally, folded into things no one was meant to see. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Lavender and ash soap, but also damp stone, worn wood, and the unmistakable sharpness of lye. And hanging everywhere, on lines, over railings, stacked in baskets, are napkins in every stage of undress. Unfolded mostly, but some folded again. Not for tables, but for sorting, storing, and strangely enough, whispering. Because in the private world of laundresses, folding had a whole different vocabulary. You pick up a stack and notice something curious. Each napkin is folded into a slightly different configuration. One is tucked into a rectangle with the corners in. Another is rolled, sausage style, and tied loosely with thread. A third has been folded corner to corner with a little twist at the center. At first it looks like nothing, just practical organization. But soon, patterns emerge. Historians still debate the extent to which laundry workers developed their own semi-secret system of folding codes. Some claim it was simple identification. This fold means guest linens. That one means family stock. Others believe it went further. That folds communicated personal notes, warnings, even feelings. One preserved housebook includes an entry by a laundress named Marta, dated 1694. She writes, folded tight with end hidden, countess's linens, folded soft with corner out, kitchen napkins. If the maid leaves a twist in the middle, send her to me, she's rushing again. You chuckle. It's the most laundry manager thing ever written. And indeed, these folds weren't meant to be decorative. They were workflow, communication, a way to track linens through endless cycles of wear and wash. In larger households, multiple laundresses worked simultaneously, and folding helped sort out not only origin, but status. Cleaned, still soaking, awaiting starch, drying fast. One fold, the corda secca, or dry rope, was used for linens too fragile to stretch on a line. Instead, it was folded into a twist and hung gently over a beam. Another, the fenestra, resembled a little window used to signal napkins needing mending. If the hole lined up with the center, urgent. If it was tucked to the side, it could wait until Sunday. And it wasn't all seriousness. Some folds, especially during festivals, were left as small jokes. A folded heart left in a lover's laundry. A fish, curled just so, left in the household steward's apron. One daring maid allegedly folded a napkin into the shape of a cat and placed it in the master's trousers. That one didn't go over well, but she later became a midwife, so all's well that folds well. These subtle acts of expression were a small way for workers to assert identity in a space where they were usually invisible. Folding was their footprint, their signature, their whisper. One beautiful anecdote tells of an aging laundress who taught her granddaughter to fold the Rosalina stanza, the tired little rose, a soft spiral used for particularly worn napkins. If the rose droops, don't starch, she'd say. Let it rest. It was equal parts folklore and practical advice, and honestly, better than most self-help books. You find a low bench and sit near the large stone basin, watching as ghostly echoes of movement pass through the room. Hands wringing cloth, dipping, folding, rinsing, folding again. Not for performance, not for beauty. Just to know what had been touched, treated, restored. Some folds marked items as blessed, linen that had been used in the chapel or by the visiting bishop. Others marked caution, folds that said, without words, this one's been soiled, handle gently. One especially curious fold, found in a Florentine laundry ledger, is called the Sorriso Nero, or black smile. It's described as a folded curve meant to signal that the owner's underthings were not to be judged. You sit with that for a moment. A gentle, dignified reminder that even in the laundry, especially in the laundry, privacy matters. There's something tender about this underworld of napkin culture. Here, folding isn't glamour or wit. It's labor, care, soft discipline. It's a quiet defiance, too. In a world that valued visible displays of refinement, these unseen folds were for each other. Not for show, but for survival. And for dignity. You stand again and reach for a final bundle on the shelf. Soft linen napkins folded in the nodo cieco, the blind knot. It's a tangle that unravels into nothing, used only at the end of the wash week. One last fold to say, we're done. Rest now. And maybe, in a way, all folding is that. The start of something. The end of something. A way of marking time, quietly, in corners of the world that no one ever writes about. Except here, except now, in this forgotten cellar where every napkin fold is a page in a silent linen-bound book. You emerge from the hush of the laundry cellar with the soft scent of soap still clinging to your senses. And as you adjust again to the warmth of the upper world, you find yourself in a different kind of quiet. A solemn, cloistered silence. Stone columns rise around you. Light filters through arched windows in narrow blades. You are in a monastery now. And here, of all places, napkin folding takes on a sacred hue. It is a modest refectory, The communal dining hall for monks. Long wooden tables, no ornament. Stools that creak as though in protest. At the head of each table, a small square of linen rests folded with precise symmetry. Nothing dramatic. No lilies, no fans. But here, the simplicity is its own kind of reverence. You take a seat at one of the tables, running your hand over the surface smoothed by decades, centuries of silent meals. And you begin to understand. In this space, folding was a spiritual act. Monastic life in Baroque Italy was bound by rhythm. Prayer, work, study, silence. And for the monks who served in the kitchen and refectory, many of them called fratelli laici, or lay brothers, folding napkins became part of that holy routine. Each napkin was folded before dawn and placed in preparation for the midday meal. The most common fold? A simple rectangular triptych, symbolic of the Holy Trinity. Left, right, center. Not fancy, but deliberate. Done mindfully, often accompanied by murmured prayer. Historians still argue whether these folds had deeper meanings or were simply habits carried over from earlier monastic orders. Some claim that Benedictine monks used different folds during Lent and Advent, while Franciscans preferred folds that echoed the shape of the Tau cross. Others suggest it was more practical than symbolic. Structured folding just made cleanup easier when no one was supposed to speak. One surviving monastic manual from the 1680s describes the proper folding of table linen for the brothers in delicate detail. It specifies that the cloth must be folded without vanity, but with attention to proportion, lest the folds dishonor the order. Which, frankly, is the monastic equivalent of a devastating burn. There's even mention of a penitenziale piega, a penitential fold, used only during periods of fasting or spiritual correction. It involved turning the corners inward and tucking them tightly, so the napkin sat small and humble on the table. It's hard not to read a bit of poetic self-reflection into that. A fold that makes itself smaller, quieter, less ostentatious. And then there's the curious tradition of the silent fold. Monks who had taken a vow of silence often used their napkin folds to communicate basic needs. A fold left with one corner lifted meant more bread. A tightly rolled napkin beside a bowl? I'm finished. A square folded diagonally and placed across the table might even signal gratitude. It was a humble, linen-based language, a soft-spoken Morse code. You wander through the refectory and find an alcove off to one side. Once a small sacristy, perhaps, now used to store the linens. Inside are narrow drawers, each labeled in Latin. Feriae, Festum, Adventum. The feast days had their own napkins. Not fancier, just different. Folded with a bit more ceremony, perhaps a subtle cross pattern in the pleats. One drawer contains a few surviving examples, folded as they were hundreds of years ago. You gently open one and find it shaped like a boat. It's unclear why. Perhaps a symbol of St. Peter, or a visual parable, or maybe just a monk with a gentle sense of humor who liked folding origami at Vespers. Because even here, amidst all this quiet, there were smiles. One story tells of a Cistercian brother who folded napkins into small donkeys during Epiphany, a nod to the humble beast of burden. Another monk in Umbria was said to create a special fold called Il Passo dell'Agnello, the lamb's step, used only during Easter week. It looked like a tiny hoof print and took 10 minutes to complete. But he did it anyway, every year for 40 years. These weren't grand gestures. They weren't for display or applause. They were acts of devotion. One monastic scholar later wrote that to fold the napkin is to prepare the body for silence. To crease with care is to honor the meal, the cloth, and the hands that made it. You sit with that thought. In a world obsessed with spectacle, the monks chose folding as a form of humility, a way to make the ordinary sacred, to turn daily maintenance into prayer. And perhaps the most poignant story of all involves a fold that wasn't meant to be seen. In the monastery of San Bartolomeo, during a plague outbreak in 1699, monks folded small napkins into triangles and placed them in the hands of the dying. They called them piega della partenza, the fold of departure. It had no spiritual authority, no official place in liturgy, but it gave comfort. It was something clean, something human, a final act of touch and care. Some of those folds were buried with the monks who held them. You exhale softly in the quiet, surrounded by the echoes of devotion that lived not in gold or sermons, but in creased linen. There is something deeply grounding in the idea that holiness could be expressed with fabric, that something so simple, so small, could mean so much. So now, as the monastery bells toll somewhere in the background and the evening shadows stretch long across the stone floor, you fold your own napkin. Not for guests, not for show, just for you. One corner in, then the other. Press the fold gently, and for a moment you are still, like the monks, like the cloth, like the air before a prayer. From the hallowed hush of monastic halls, you now step into a scene much louder, warmer, and considerably stickier. You're in a bustling Baroque tavern, though not the rowdy, mug-smashing kind you might expect. This one is tucked on the edge of a market square in Verona, a place where weary merchants, off-duty artisans, and a few chatty widows come to share food, stories, and a drink or three. And scattered across every table? Napkins. Folded, yes, but here they take on a new, unruly life. Gone is the delicate formality of courtly folds, the quiet discipline of monastic linen. These napkins are loud in spirit, rough around the edges and often improvised. Their creases are less perfect symmetry, more close enough. But even in this more chaotic setting, they have a purpose, and they still carry a kind of genius. You sit at a low wooden table near the hearth, where a thick linen square has been folded into a double pocket. Inside, a hunk of cheese and a smear of fig paste. Not art, perhaps, but very effective. This fold is known as la tasca del fabbro, the blacksmith's pocket. Tough and practical, it was often used in working-class eateries to deliver food safely while doubling as a handkerchief once the meal was done. Less grace, more grease. Historians still debate whether tavern folds originated with the cooks, the servers, or the guests themselves. Some believe the folds were developed by staff to speed service, creating little edible bundles that could be tossed onto plates or into hands. Others suggest that customers, eager to avoid sticky fingers, folded their own napkins on the spot. It's entirely plausible that both are true, depending on how much wine had been served. You pick up another nearby napkin and see it's been folded around a wine cup to create a makeshift coaster. Clever. And probably the only thing protecting the table from a new stain. A corner is dipped in something that looks suspiciously like olive brine. You don't ask. The tavern was a place of utility and adaptation. Folds here were born from need, not nicety, but that didn't mean they lacked creativity. One tavern in Venice was famous for folding napkins into little pouches that, when squeezed, revealed a clove of roasted garlic hidden inside. A spicy surprise, both amusing and slightly alarming if you weren't expecting it. The owner claimed it added drama to digestion, which frankly, it probably did. Another establishment in Naples was known for its napkin game, a folded challenge given to guests at the end of the meal. Each napkin contained a tiny riddle or dare. If you solved it, you earned a second helping of dessert. If not, you had to sing a love song. This might sound whimsical until you remember most people had been drinking since noon. There were also message folds, linen napkins twisted into shapes that hinted at gossip. A spiral meant someone had gotten engaged. A triangle with one flipped corner suggested a fight. A crooked square? Someone had arrived late, again. These weren't official signs, of course. Just little habits passed among friends, regulars, and clever servers who knew how to keep things interesting. And amid the disorder, there were even unwritten codes. A napkin left unfolded beside an untouched cup of wine. A subtle protest. Perhaps at the price, or the service, or the company. A napkin tightly rolled and placed upright. A signal that someone was waiting. Maybe for a friend, or a favor, or an answer. Some folds were even used to settle bets. 2 napkins folded into birds, one larger than the other. The bigger one? Loser buys the next round. There's a particularly endearing tale of an older couple in Mantua who came to the same tavern every Thursday for over 20 years. The wife would fold their napkin into a heart, the husband into a fish. They'd place them side by side and toast. On the rare week when the fish didn't appear, the tavern grew noticeably quieter. And not all tavern folds were local. Sailors passing through brought folding tricks from distant ports, triangular pouches from the Ottoman coast, rolled cylinders used in Portuguese markets, even a curious fold shaped like a shell from Marseille. Taverns became informal museums of fold exchange, where linen met language and custom met chaos. One marginal note in a tavern ledger reads, "The German merchant folds his napkin before drinking. He folds it again after. I do not know why, but I respect the pattern." You find a bench in the corner now and sit among the ghosts of clinking cups and half-told stories. A server passes by in memory, tossing folded napkins onto the table with practiced flair. Not to impress, just to move things along. Maybe, for them, every fold was a sentence. Here's your food. Here's your turn. Here's something you can use. Because here, folding was about function. Yes, but also connection. A quiet moment of contact between strangers. A pause in the noise. And isn't that what taverns are for? You reach for your own napkin again, folding it loosely into a spiral. No purpose, no message, just the gentle act of turning cloth into something slightly different, something a little more interesting than before. And in this cozy, unruly place, half laughter, half olive oil, you feel something old and comforting settle over you. A shared language, never taught, passed through linen and time. The tavern fades behind you, its echoes of laughter and crumpled napkins giving way to a gentler sort of scene. Slower, quieter, though no less full of folds. You find yourself now in a private home. Not a palace or an estate, but a respectable bourgeois residence in Florence. The sort of place where the silver is polished but not flaunted, where dinner is served with grace but without trumpets. And it's here, inside the walls of these tidy Baroque homes, that napkin folding becomes something domestic, personal, and perhaps, for the first time, a little bit emotional. You walk through the entryway, across creaking parquet floors, and into a modest dining room bathed in afternoon light. On the table, 2 napkins, both folded into simple fans, one slightly taller than the other. Across the room, someone has written in a journal, "Today I folded for Marco. I made the corners a little sharper, just in case he notices." Napkin folding in the home was less about spectacle and more about sentiment. It wasn't for guests, it was for family. A little extra flourish for a spouse, a playful twist for a child, a comforting fold for a parent feeling under the weather. These folds were gestures of care, nestled inside daily routine. Historians still debate just how widespread folding was in the middle classes. Some records suggest it was mostly reserved for holidays and name days. Others propose that modest folding, triangles, pouches, scrolls, was surprisingly common, passed down quietly from mother to daughter, maid to mistress, often without fanfare or written record. One thing we do know Instruction manuals from the time began to mention domestic folding, separate from the elaborate court styles. These chapters advised readers on folds of practicality and warmth, phrases that still sound soothing today. You find a linen chest tucked against the wall. Inside, neat stacks of napkins, some still creased, others softly worn at the edges. There's a guidebook, handwritten, with sketches and names like Il Sole Piccolo, La Luna Stanca, and Il Cuore Coperto. These weren't display pieces. They were ways of saying, I thought of you. One surviving household diary from 1692 recounts a fold called Il Nido, the nest. A small roll in the center of a square, with the sides gently lifted like wings, used for breakfast bread, or sometimes notes. One entry reads, Julia found the ring. She cried. We all folded nidos that day. A family folding together. Napkins as ritual, love in linen form. And there were practical folds, of course. The asola, or buttonhole fold, was used to hold cutlery in homes without full silver sets. The taglio doppio, a double-cut fold, served to divide the bread from the fruit in shared baskets. These small innovations helped stretch a single piece of linen into a multi-tool of sorts. Pouch, divider, presentation, placemat. Children had their favorites. One little fold, still passed down in Tuscan folk tradition, is the gufo, the owl. Simple, wide-eyed, and just crooked enough to be funny. A folded napkin owl left beside a child's plate meant dessert was coming, if they finished their vegetables. You smile, picturing it. And you notice how many of these home folds had a sense of rhythm, a flow. The folding itself could be meditative, like kneading dough or plucking beans. Done without rush, without flourish. Just a gentle repetition that soothed the mind as it shaped the cloth. And the deeper you go into this imagined home, the more folded linen you find. In drawers, in baskets, wrapped around herbs in the kitchen, holding lavender sachets in the wardrobe. One servant's log from 1710 even refers to napkin-freshened linen. Bed sheets scented and preserved using folded napkins that carried dried lemon peel. The napkins acted like little scent packets, folded with care and tied with thread. In moments of illness, a folded napkin placed over the eyes was believed to soothe fever, especially if chilled with vinegar water. The fold? La maschera bianca, the white mask. Parents taught it to their children, who taught it to theirs. More folklore than medicine, but the comfort was real. You enter the nursery now. A stack of napkins sits near a low cradle. Some are folded into animals, others into spirals. A note beside them reads, Elena cried less when the snail visited. And for a second, the entire history of folding distills into one gentle moment. A tired mother, a napkin, and a baby soothed by something so simple, so silly, so made of love. Historians rarely talk about this kind of folding. There are no treatises or exhibitions, no surviving linen swans from the kitchens of Verona's middle class. But these folds mattered, because they carried more than food. They carried intention. And isn't that what folding always does? You take something flat, something overlooked, and you change it, just a little, into something that says, I was here, I tried. You sit now at the table once more, folding the napkin beside your plate. You choose a cuore nascosto, a hidden heart. Just a fold in, a tuck, a gentle press. No one else will see it, but you'll know it's there. Evening settles once again as you leave the comfort of that Florentine home, and the air begins to hum with a different energy. You're in motion now, literally, jostling gently along a dusty road inside a padded coach bound for Rome. The leather seat creaks with every turn. A lantern swings overhead, and tucked neatly beside you, in a compartment beneath a box of sugared almonds is a napkin. Folded, of course. This is not a place you might expect to encounter the lost art of folding. But travel in Baroque Italy had its own rituals, and folding was very much part of them. This particular napkin has been folded into a neat, tight triangle and pinned shut with a sprig of rosemary. You unfold it slowly and find a heel of bread, a soft wedge of cheese, and a small note written in an elegant but shaky hand. Eat this before the hills. The roads are cruel. You smile. It's a napkin fold with instructions and warning. Historians still debate the precise use of napkin folding in Baroque travel. Some argue it was entirely utilitarian, just a tidy way to wrap food. Others suggest there was artistry even here, in motion. Carefully folded cloth serving as edible care packages, tokens of affection, or little parcels of identity in unfamiliar towns. One account from a Venetian courier in 1702 describes how folded napkins served as both food holders and calling cards. When he arrived in a city, he'd present folded linen stamped with a household seal, proof of introduction, a sign of whose table he'd recently left. These folds, reused and subtly perfumed, were a kind of soft passport. Coachmen and carriage stewards had their own napkin folding tricks. The mezza luna del viaggio, traveling half moon, was a favorite. It could cradle a boiled egg and prevent it from cracking, while also offering a tiny nook for salt. That's right. The entire Baroque road system was lubricated by cleverly folded eggs. You pause to imagine that. There's something tender about the thought of travelers unfolding meals like little gifts, somewhere between Florence and Ferrara, under a sycamore, with dust on their boots and linen across their knees. And there were other uses too. Women traveling long distances often folded napkins into compact sachets, holding lavender or crushed clove to soothe queasy stomachs or mask the less than fragrant conditions of 17th century road travel. One noblewoman's journal refers to her fold of defense, a tightly packed square she pressed to her face when crossing particularly pungent goat carts. There's even reference to a fold called la linguetta, the little tongue, designed to hold hard candies or licorice root. Mostly for children, but let's be honest. When the journey stretches into its 5th hour and the wheels start to squeak, everyone becomes a child in need of sugar. One curious travel practice, especially among upper-class youth on grand tours, involved competitive folding. Friends would each prepare a napkin fold before the journey began. At each inn, they'd compare whose fold survived the journey best. A melted spiral? Disqualified. An intact colomba volante, the flying dove? Instant winner. These harmless games passed the miles, along with naps, dice, and endless snacking. And napkins weren't just for food. Some folds served as impromptu tools. A folded square could become a cushion for sore elbows. A twist of linen could pad a bruised ankle or hold a cracked mirror in place. One inventive traveler used a napkin roll to wedge a squeaky window shut. Another reportedly folded his napkin into a whistle shape to call his valet, though historians believe that was more of a party trick than a practical strategy. Still, the ingenuity was impressive. You lean back now, lulled by the coach's rocking rhythm, and glance at another passenger across the way. She's unwrapping a folded linen shaped like a tiny pillow. Inside, a letter. Not food, not perfume. Just paper, neatly protected. Folded into a fold. Historians love to talk about post roads and ink seals and wax stamps, but rarely do they mention the napkins. And yet, so many small, quiet correspondences passed through fabric. Notes slipped into pockets, poems folded into pouches, farewells written quickly before a coach pulled away, protected by linen and tucked under a belt. There's even a preserved example in the Corsini family archives, A folded napkin containing a sprig of thyme and a message that simply says, "Remember Naples. Remember me." The napkin bears a faint lipstick print, which, well, you don't need to be a historian to understand that fold. Not all folded napkins were romantic. Some were functional alerts. A square fold tied with red string meant food safe for the road. Green meant for sharing. Blue thread? Return the napkin if you make it home. A quiet practicality, colored thread, and cotton squares navigating the dangers of rocky paths and uncertain inns. You imagine travelers like you, carriage-bound, napkin-equipped, munching on cheese and figs as the Italian countryside rolled past, folding their comforts, their notes, their hopes for good weather and smooth wheels into cloth. And here you are, still folding, still unfolding. As the coach pulls into a dusty village square, you tuck your napkin back into your coat pocket, folded simply, the way your hand remembers. Maybe you'll use it again. Maybe you'll leave it behind for someone else to find. That's the thing about folds. They hold more than what's inside. They hold memory. The carriage pulls away behind you, its wheels fading into the dusty distance. And you now find yourself beneath marble columns, flanked by frescoed walls, and breathing in the distinct scent of waxed wood and beeswax polish. You've arrived at an art school, or more accurately, a Baroque Accademia d'Arte, where the hum of practice and critique hums beneath vaulted ceilings. But you're not here for the paintings or statues. No, you've followed the folds, because even among pigments and plasters, napkin folding found its curious little corner. You make your way through rows of canvases and easels until you reach a quiet, sunlit room at the back. It's not on any map, and yet here, folded linen is taken as seriously as anatomy or perspective. In the 17th century, this was where young artists trained their hands, not just on charcoal and brush, but on cloth. It's a little-known fact that folding napkins became a kind of motor skill training for aspiring sculptors and draftsmen. And not just for warm-ups. Folding was seen as a study in form, shadow, and balance. If you could master a 6-crease swan without puckering the linen, you might just be trusted to carve a cherub's wing. Historians still argue whether this practice began as a formal method or an eccentricity passed from one whimsical master to another. One Florentine teacher in 1684, Giuseppe Conti, is said to have graded his students on their ability to create 5 emotionally distinct folds. One surviving sketchbook from the period shows page after page of napkin folds drawn like architectural blueprints. Dotted lines, numbered pleats, careful notes in the margin. Fold inward with grace. Do not bruise the cloth. Let it rest. You pick up a napkin left folded on a nearby bench. It's shaped like a lion's paw. Another, folded into a nautilus spiral, rests under a small marble bust. Folds like sculpture. Sculpture like folds. A quiet call and response between cloth and clay. Some art students even used napkins in their finished pieces. A still life from 1691 shows a plate of quince, a pewter fork, and beside it, a folded napkin in the shape of a crown, half unraveled, mid-meal. Not flashy, just truthful. A little domestic drama. Others took it further. There was a movement, brief but passionate, among a circle of Neapolitan artists who believed that folded linen held symbolic power. They painted napkins as metaphors, the untied fold for betrayal, the tightly creased diamond for stoicism, the rippling wave fold for grief. One dramatic piece, simply titled "Folded Twice," featured nothing but a single napkin on a barren table, surrounded by shadow. Critics were baffled. Dinner guests were likely confused, but the folds held. And here's where it gets even stranger. Some sculptors began using actual linen folds as molds for clay studies. They'd fold, dip the cloth in thin wax, let it dry, and then press it against damp clay to capture texture. One workshop in Bologna even advertised folded mold studies for sale. Napkin folds frozen in terracotta. The idea was to train students' hands by teaching them to see drapery, not just as drapery, but as intention made visible. A crease is never just a crease, it's a decision. In a culture obsessed with visual storytelling, folding became a silent narrative. A way of saying something precise without drawing a line. Something that could hold its shape long enough to be remembered, and then quietly fade. You pause beside a dusty window, where a student once sat and folded the same cloth over and over until his hands understood weight, tension, balance. One hand flat, the other guiding. No two folds quite the same. You try it yourself, pressing one corner inward, tucking the edge, noticing the shadow it casts on the tabletop. And you begin to see what they saw, the napkin as canvas, as sculpture, as metaphor. It's no wonder that some folding styles began to earn names borrowed from art itself. The angolo chiaroscuro, the shadowed corner, was a fold used to create visual depth at table settings, mimicking light play. The sfumato piega, or smoky fold, created soft, rounded transitions with no sharp lines, ideal for drawing attention without dominance. And then there's the piega sospesa, the suspended fold, designed to hover slightly above the table surface. Achieved through strategic starching and air drying, it created a tiny cloth tent. A whimsical touch that served no real purpose except to make people wonder, how did they do that? Even today, art historians rediscover these references tucked into old correspondence, often dismissed as trifles. A letter from a young artist to his mentor reads, "I cannot yet master the fold of longing. Mine look like wet socks," which might be the most honest thing ever written in any art school, anywhere. And now, as golden light floods the art room and your napkin rests, half folded beside you, you realize something. Folding isn't just about linen. It's about practice, pattern, precision, and feeling. It's about learning to hold a moment still, just long enough to notice it, before it softens again and disappears. Like paint on canvas, like a crease in time. The art school grows dim behind you, shadows stretching across the polished floors like folds of dusk, and you step into the final chapter of this strange, gentle journey. Not into a palace or a tavern or even a monastery, but into the attic of time itself. A storage room, high above a forgotten villa in Parma. The air is dry and still. Dust motes drift like sleepy fireflies. Wooden crates line the walls, each labeled in ink gone faint and brown. And inside? Napkins. Dozens of them. Hundreds, perhaps. Folded, preserved, forgotten. You kneel beside a chest marked 1734, Casa di Bernardi. The hinges squeal softly as you lift the lid, revealing stacks of linen, carefully wrapped in paper that crinkles like old leaves. The folds are all intact, some simple, some ornate, all silent. It's a linen library, a textile time capsule. No one meant for them to survive. And yet here they are. These aren't showpieces. They're not embroidered or gilded. What makes them special is that they were saved. A fold called Il Saluto Finale, the final greeting, is still tucked into the top of one bundle. It's a slow spiral with a tip curled inward, meant to signal farewell at the end of a banquet. Not a goodbye exactly, more like a sigh, a letting go. Historians still argue whether these attic archives were intentional collections or simply abandoned trousseaux, left behind by daughters who never married, or linen maids who retired and had no one to pass the craft to. Some think they were practice pieces. Others say they were last-minute rescues from moths and mildew. Either way, the folds remain. You pull out one particularly delicate piece and open it gently. Inside, a faded note, pressed so long into the fabric that it has left a shadow of ink on the linen itself. It reads, "For whoever finds this, may your hands be steady and your table full." That's the thing about napkins. They're made to be touched, to be folded, unfolded, refolded, passed from one hand to another. They're never meant to stay still forever. And yet, here in this attic, they've rested for centuries, bearing witness to lives that have long since quieted. There's a fold here called La piega scomparsa, the vanished fold. It was designed not for show, but for preservation. A fold so compact and precise, it could fit into the pocket of a waistcoat without creasing. The Baroque equivalent of a travel drive. A pocket napkin, holding perhaps a note, a list, a crumb of memory. And beside it? A stack of napkins folded identically, labeled only with dates. March 1705, June 1711, April 1722. No explanations. Just time, marked in fabric. You can't help but wonder, were they daily records, anniversaries, griefs remembered in linen form? Another bundle holds demonstration folds from a long-retired folding tutor. Each one labeled meticulously, Swallow, Attempt 1. Swallow, Attempt 2. Swallow, Passable. The handwriting gets shakier over time. The folds get looser. The last one is simply labeled, Rest. You smile gently. You're not alone up here. The room is full of invisible hands. And there, leaning against a dusty window frame, is a folded napkin shaped like a fan. You've seen this one before. It's simple, elegant, the kind you fold not for effect, but for memory. And on the edge, barely visible in threadbare embroidery, is a single name. Alessandra. No date, no context, just a name, stitched with love into the fabric of a fold. Because sometimes that's enough. You sit down among the boxes and feel the weight of time around you. Not heavy, but soft. These folds held meals, messages, medicines, mischief. They held silence. They held meaning. They held lives. And in their quiet, careful symmetry, they still do. You fold one of the napkins now, slowly, intentionally, into a crescent. You don't know the name of this fold. Maybe it never had one. Maybe it doesn't need one. What matters is that it folds, that it holds, that it remains. You place it gently back into the box and close the lid. Not with finality, but with reverence. And as you descend from the attic, the stairs creaking beneath your feet, the folds travel with you, because nothing, once folded with care, is ever truly forgotten. And now, as the folds soften and fade into darkness, you let yourself settle. Your breath slows. The rustle of linen becomes the whisper of night wind through shutters. The creak of attic wood becomes the lull of distant thunder. And the edges of your thoughts blur, like cloth laid gently to rest. You imagine your own napkin, folded by some invisible hand, tucked into the quiet of this moment. Not ornate, not perfect, just soft, familiar, steady. The kind of fold that tells you it's okay to let go now. To drift. The stories, like the linen, have been touched and turned and held up to the light. They've rustled and murmured and sighed their way through palaces and kitchens, theaters and cellars, hearts and hands. They've shown you 1,000 ways to say, I care, I remember, I'm here. And now the folds loosen. They don't vanish, they relax, just as you do. So close your eyes, if they haven't already closed. Let the gentle weight of these histories press into your pillow, like a well-folded napkin left beside a tray. Let the echoes soften into nothing. Let the creases of the day fall away. And know this, there will always be someone, somewhere, folding something with love. even if it's just for themselves, even if it's just for you. Good night.